Right. Thanks everyone for coming to the BNRC meeting tonight. We have a full agenda, but a little less full than we originally thought. So we are going to start tonight with the Blacktail Creek Riparian action update. The Montana Coal site update is not going to happen tonight. They're going to do that later. So that won't be on the agenda tonight. And then we'll go through the SSTOU funding, Parrot, Groundwater. We're going to cut short because Jim's sick. So Jim Ford is sick, and Pat's going to give us a bit of an update, but it probably won't take as long as we have on the agenda. And then we'll go through the Butte Area 1 Restoration Fund update, and we'll go through Butte-Silver Bow Shop replacement project. So with all of that, do you want to go through the hybrid meeting for me to do that, or?
You can do that if we
Okay. Yeah, I think I've got the. So we do have a forum tonight. All of our BNRC members are here. We've got Sister Mary Jo online. I believe Courtney's coming. He called me and said he was on his way. So I think we'll have him also. Maybe
Okay.
Miranda wants to do it. I don't know.
No, for those folks that are online and present here, we are recording the meeting. We will download that to our website once we go through the YouTube stuff. So you should be able to find it on our website at another night. So yeah, we thank everybody for coming out on a winter night. Thanks for all the folks from Helena for making the journey. We sure appreciate it. And as Elizabeth said, Jim is home sick tonight, so we don't have much to talk about on the Parrot monitoring program. So, Madam Chair, I think we're ready for our first presentation.
I think we are. So we have, is Joel Gerhardt gonna do the Blacktail Creek? Or is Katie?
Yes,
You're
we're
gonna introduce him
in a little bit.
Perfect.
Yeah, you can get your presentation started.
This
where's the
is
best-
Miranda. To interrupt really quickly, one thing you forgot, Pat, is that we do ask that all participants announce their name before they speak, for people online,
Thank
so
you.
they can tell who's talking in the room.
Okay.
Perfect. So I'm Katie Garson-Forba. I'm the Bureau Chief for Superfund, Abandoned Mine Land and Construction with DEQ. I've been in this role for just over a year now, and I appreciate you guys letting us come and speak to you about updates on Blacktail Creek. So I just wanted to kind of give an overview of where we're at as a department and then next steps moving forward. We'll let Joel talk about some of the technical things that happened in 2023, the sampling, and then projection for 2024, what we're going to be looking at. And then kind of our long-term schedule, because I know that's been at the forefront of everybody's minds and how we're planning to move forward. And then I will walk through where we're at with all the budget update stuff. And so we'll get you guys, we included those tables, the budgets from last fiscal year and this fiscal year, and we'll spend some time walking through that with everybody. But first, I just want to take an opportunity to introduce our team that we have here. We have some new faces that you guys may not be as familiar with or be familiar with in a different capacity. So I've got Logan Dunning here, who has been working on the Clark Fork and Stream side for us, and very willingly, or maybe not as willingly, just volunteered to step in as our kind of interim project manager on this one. As most of you know, our project manager was on it before, moved into a different position in the agency back in May, and so we went out for hiring effort, and we didn't find the right fit. And fit is really important to both me and our division administrator, Amy, and so we decided we're gonna make the right choice. Logan stepped in, thankfully, and we'll serve kind of in this interim capacity as we move forward. We will look to hire and backfill the position still, but we wanted to keep progress happening for this site. With that, we also have Kevin Stone, who is the new section supervisor for Federal Superfund. He took over for Carolina Blue when she moved on to EPA. Really excited to have Kevin on board. He worked previously for us into the public information officer role, and has a phenomenal grasp for Superfund, but also strong advocate for community engagement, stakeholder engagement, and working together just collaboratively. And so really excited for him to be in his role, and he's been in that for about a month now, and already we're seeing some really cool progress happen. So really appreciate that. And then Amy Steinmetz, my division administrator, is in the back there, and you guys have probably seen her a lot of meetings down here in Butte. So So that's our project team as we move forward. At this point, I will turn it over to Joel to talk about some of the technical stuff that they worked on, some of the investigation work that was done. And then when he wraps up, we'll walk through the budget and be able to answer any questions that you guys have as it pertains to that. So. Turn it over to him.
Good. I'm Joel. Can everybody hear me? Okay, and can you see the presentation here and online? Great. So thanks for the introduction, Kate. I'm happy to be here tonight. I'm really glad to hear that I probably have as much time as I need now. So I just won't have to rush through everything twice quickly as I would have otherwise. For people who are not familiar with exactly what area we're talking about, we'll just kind of talk real quickly about where this site is and, you know, some of the features that impact what's going on, some of the goals and objectives for that site, not only from this particular investigation, the stage we're at right now, but overall what the project needs to do. We'll give you a status update on where we are just in terms of characterizing the site and what the kind of the next steps are. We'll discuss what those next steps are, why they're in the order they're in, and why the schedule looks like it does, and talk about what the schedule for those upcoming steps are. And then hopefully have a little bit of time left over at the end to answer some questions if you have any questions. So as far as that goes, everybody I'm sure recognizes this feature right here. That is the Berkeley pit in the town of Butte, and the big yellow line outlining the Butte Priority Soils Operable Unit. I'm assuming we all have seen that map before. The area that we're talking about tonight is the Blacktail Creek riparian areas, which is just this little red area down here. It's close to the Butte Visitor Center. And that's the area that we're talking about right now for tonight. Zooming in on that side a little bit, the red boundaries on the figure show the areas that were contemplated in the freeze-out, the further remedial scope of work, I guess, it's a mouthful, that were going to be addressed under the Blacktail Creek riparian actions. There's a lot of activity going on down here. We've got the KOA campground, the Butte Visitor Center, we have the interstate, bridges over Lexington Avenue, Montana Avenue, the discharge from the pilot treatment system, metro storm drain, subdrain items, vaults. We have all kinds of utility lines for Butte. There's a 42-inch sewer line. There's this creeks itself. There's a lot going on in this area. And so what we wanted to do is we wanted to get in here and look at this area more closely, figure out exactly the volume of materials that needed to be removed, and then move on from there. So basically, the Blacktail Creek runs right through the middle of it. We've divided it into a couple areas, an area north of George Street, an area south of George Street, and there's an area right at the outlet of Grove Gulch that also needed to be investigated just to make sure it didn't have any contamination on the stream banks and in the stream. So we looked at all those areas. So that's what we're here to talk about. So the goals and objectives were kind of laid out in the freeze-out on what needed to be done. And I'm not going to go over every word on this slide, just kind of the highlights. What we're trying to do in that red area that we just talked about in the Blacktail Creek riparian areas is to remove the tailings, waste, and contaminated soils and sediments. That's what the freeze-out says that DEQ needs to do in that area. There's other elements that the settling defendants need to do in coordination with that, but this is the role of DEQ. It also says in the freeze-out that the total expected disposal quantities of tailings, waste, and contaminated soils shall be further investigated. It said in there, you have to go look a little more closely at this and refine that volume estimate. And in terms of construction planning and evaluation, needed to look closely at dewatering, dewatterability, and potential impacts on critical infrastructure in the area. This is what the freeze-out dictated that needs to be done as part of this investigation. In terms of the purpose of this step that we're on right now, it's called the PDI, or the pre-design investigation. I'll go over it a little bit later where that fits in the overall process. The PDI, the goal and the purpose of the PDI was specified in the freeze-out, and we're trying to follow that as closely as possible. And then really it's about addressing data gaps and conducting additional field investigations to gather design level data to help us make these design decisions. That started off by evaluating the existing data. There was a number of investigations that have been done in the past by the Bureau of Mines and Geology and other parties, but they didn't really have all of the information necessary to put together design. So we looked at what are the data gaps and how do we fill those data gaps. The data gaps that we knew going into this were we need more or better definition of the depth and extent of the removal of the contaminants out there. We needed to determine if there's some potential presence of municipal waste out there. There's evidence of dumping that's happened out there in the past. We did find slag, a little bit of municipal debris, not that much, but some. The other key question is, if you look at that, there's a wetland right in the middle of it and a creek running through the middle of the site. And given the depth of the tailings that could be out there, removing the water from that so we can safely excavate those materials, dry them, transport them via city streets to a mine waste repository, that's quite a process in a very limited area with people and activities in a visitor center and things like that. So we need to understand how hard it is going to be to just dewater, what the quality of that water looks like, how we're going to dispose of it, and how we're going to dry and manage the waste that we take out of there. So other issues are, how disposal requirements. If we ran into hydrocarbons in the waste, that maybe have to be handled differently and couldn't go to the mine waste repository. If we have asbestos or things like that, we wanted to know if we have those kind of things present so we can make an informed decision on how we have to manage those materials during construction. So our goal was to go out there and collect that additional design level data to answer some of these kind of principal overlying questions that we need to know before we can put together a plan and a design for that area. So that's kind of the purpose of what we're trying to do. Everybody's familiar with the Superfund process, but we'll talk just a little bit about the RD and RA process, just because it highlights where we are in that process right now. There's, the RD and RA always go together. Remedial design, remedial action always go together, because you can't do a remedial action without a remedial design. And there's no point in doing a remedial design if you don't do a remedial action. So you have to do them together. Typically, the first step in doing that is prepare a remedial design work plan. In consultation with the agencies, it was decided it was more important to get started with the PDI work plan, because so much of what was necessary was already defined in the pre-sal. We have prepared a draft RD work plan that's in review and will be released at some point in time. But we are working on that. It just hasn't been done yet. But normally it's done before you go to the PDI. So in terms of the pre-design investigation, usually that starts with a work plan. It says, what are you going to do during this investigation? What samples you're going to collect, where you're going to collect them from, how you're going to analyze those. It also includes a quality assurance project plan that says exactly how you're going to check the quality of everything, kind of duplicates you're going to take, are you going to review that data, ensure that it's enforceable, and you collect enough data of high enough quality that you can answer the questions you're trying, you can answer the questions that you have established. Those data quality objectives, will you collect the data that lets you do what you need to do? Those were all prepared last year and approved. Then that follows, and you take that, you go out and you do your investigation. We did that last year in August and September. And right now we're in what's called the PDI evaluation report. It's like a data summary report, but a little bit beyond that. We actually look at the data. Don't just say we collected the data, it's all good. We look at it and evaluate what it means to us and what in the next steps in the process. And that's where we are right now, is preparing the PDI evaluation report. Coming next, after we do this, there would be the remedial design reports, and the freestyle specifies 30, 65, 95, or 30, 60, 95, and 100% design reports. And that's typical, that's standard of the Superfund process. And that's quite a process to prepare all the information, the plans, the specs, and all the supporting documentation analyses that go into those documents over the next couple of years. And it's all supported by the data that we're collecting now. So, and then also during design, typically, sometimes you don't know exactly what you're going to end up with your design. You may at the 60% level or 30% level, identify another small data gap or a certain design element that you need to do another small investigation for. There could be other small investigations that we need to do during design to collect design level information to support those designs. So that's coming up. As soon as we get through that whole process, then we can step into the remedial action and the construction, where we actually go out and remove the material and do the cleanup. And then after that, it's mandatory to do a couple of years of operations and maintenance, make sure the vegetation is working right, that is functioning the way that we want it to, and the site is stabilized. And then you can do the closeout reports and things like that. So it's quite a process over a number of years is required to make this whole thing work. Our approach to the pre-design investigation is phased. We already know that we have questions that we can't maybe answer with the information that we've collected so far. We also know that we may not have need to collect that information. So We evaluated those data gaps. One of the first ones we looked at was existing groundwater models in this area. And those existing groundwater models were available from other sites. The settling defendants have been very generous in sharing a model developed by Stantec for the area that we have found works very well and suits the purposes of this investigation. So we evaluated that model and said, it's good enough for us to work with for the design purposes down there. The next thing was the soil borings, where we actually poked holes in the ground and collected samples. We did some field XRF and some laboratory analysis to determine, the volume and concentrations of the waste materials that are there. Next, we would develop a preliminary excavation surface based on that information. And then we go back to our groundwater removal. So we evaluated that model and we think we can use it. Now that we know what the base of excavation looks like, we run some groundwater models and say, how much water do we need to remove for how long? And what are the extents of that? How far does that go under the interstate? How far does that go under the visitor center? How deep do we have to draw it down to dewater the area we need to do the construction? Then we can look at that and say, well, it's either going to be a big impact or a small impact. If it's a big impact, we may need to go collect more geotechnical information. Then we would go out and do phase 2, collect some specific samples for consolidation and things like that for specific geotechnical evaluations. Right now, we're looking at it and we're saying, maybe we have enough information, maybe we don't. But if we decide we have enough information, we won't do phase 2. We decide we need more information, we will do phase 2. And that's kind of where we are in this PDI evaluation process. If we need more data, we'll go get it. So the phase 2 would come a little bit later this year if needed. And then in our report, we summarize all those findings. And then we have put out a separate report addendum or a tech memo for that geotech evaluation so that people who need to look at that, say the highway department, can look at the information that's relevant that they need to know without having to dig through the entire evaluation report. So that's kind of why we phase the PDI in 2 phases right now. That's why we're in the process that we're in right now. Schedule wise, the PDI work plan was approved in August of 2023. We started the field work a week or 2 after that, completed it in late August and early September. We did some in situ XRF analysis and all the samples as we collected them. We also bagged the samples that were submitted to the lab and did an ex situ analysis on them. Then we completed those analysis in October and November. All the data are back, it's been validated. Then we developed our preliminary excavation service in December. Right now we're doing groundwater models. How much water do we have to remove from there? Then we're working on a geotechnical assessment and working on the phase 1 PDI evaluation report, which we should have a draft done this spring and the final should be up probably sometime this summer. We would do that phase 2 investigation summer, fall, if needed. And then other investigations, borrow source investigations, stream bed sources, materials, things like that can be done later as necessary during design. Those are of limited scope and scale and can usually be done fairly quickly. So that's the schedule. So just a couple pictures here to show you kind of what we were looking at. As far as the work plan went, this is every dot represents potential proposed borings. The green dots represent what we call priority 1 borings. And the yellow dots represent priority 2 borings. The reason why we had the 2 differences is from previous investigations, there was difficulty getting sample recovery from the direct push technologies, smaller samples, and it was wet, and they just poured out of the bottom of the barrel and we couldn't get samples. We used a larger diameter sonic core rig, and we were concerned about sample recovery as well. So we built in a couple extra borings just in case we had bad recovery in some areas and we needed to poke more holes in the ground. So that's the difference between the green and the yellow ones. Which is a couple of pictures from during the investigation of, the sonic boring rig drilling. And then as you pull it out of the ground, we extrude those cores into the core sleeves, cut them open. We sniff for presence of hydrocarbons. We use a photoionization detector to measure it if we smelled something. We did in situ XRF to identify where we thought the bottom of the waste was in the field so that we could collect preservable mercury samples and send those off to the lab. So we didn't have to take those back and heat them and hold them for a while. They were collected cold, preserved, and sent to the lab, so we have valid mercury data at the bottom of all these borings. From this, you can see we got really good recovery. Over 80% at least. I would say good to excellent recovery in all of our borings. We could very directly inspect the different layers in the geology that we saw underneath the site. This picture up here, we're just looking at, the in situ XRF is like put a plastic bag over the nose of the XRF, dig a little hole in the middle of the samples to get to the middle so you get outside the smear zone, so you aren't looking at contamination that's been drugged across the surface of the core and read from the middle of the sample. That's one way of reducing some of those interferences. We have mixed results on the in situ samples. It was okay, but not great. The samples then were cut into 1 foot bags, and then they're in storage right now with the Montana Pole plant in case we need to go back and collect more samples. There are 5 samples per bucket. Every bucket there represents 5 feet of an individual core. We can just go back and grab samples if we need those. So that's where we are just in terms of doing the investigation. When all is said and done, this figure right here represents all of the borings that we actually completed. And you'll see we only had to do 1 priority 2 sonic coring on there because we got such good recovery everywhere else, we didn't need to go back in and do it. That meant we were done in 2 weeks instead of 4. And so we were able to save some money, and it cost quite a bit less to do the field investigation because we got good recovery. Our first boring or 2 we didn't do so well on. We worked carefully with the driller. It was O'Keefe here in town. The drill was very good. They worked with us. We modified our technique a little bit. After that, we got great recoveries, and the process worked out really well. So thanks to having those guys on the team. After we're done, we went back and we build this into our we look at the concentrations after we get the concentrations back from the lab. Everything, it's not based on what we saw in the boring, whether it looked stained or looked dirty or looked clean or a certain color. It's based on the concentration that we got back from the lab. So we get it back from the lab. We sent 3 samples from what we thought was the bottom of the waste to the lab. 1 above what we thought was the bottom and 2 below, just to bracket that area. We didn't miss any of the borings. The field XRF was good enough that we did get that correct interval, I think, on all of our borings. And then what we did find out is that some areas of the site did not exceed, and we were able to tighten up the boundaries a little bit and develop a preliminary excavation survey. So I want you to look at just in here, if you look at all of these utilities running through the middle of the excavation here, the creek running through here, and how close it is to the visitor center, and look at this green line right here. I'm going to look at a cross section in just a minute that represents this green line from the visitor center up to the interstate that shows some key findings. This is just a fluorescent view of what the excavation, the hole would look like in 3 dimensions, just in case that's easier for people to visualize than contour lines. So this is a very simple, very early cross section. We'll preview this up later and make it look really great, but it's just, right out of the geologic model for the site. What we see at the surface is the black line at the top is the existing ground surface. This is Interstate 90, the visitor center over here. This is the existing water table in Blacktail Creek. And these are some borings. Now, don't panic, because when you do the geologic model, sometimes you pull a cross section over onto your alignment. So it's off of the alignment a little bit, but it's representative of what we found out there. The brown material represents overburden. Material that's above the contaminated zone, but doesn't meet the waste removal criteria, but it also doesn't meet any other table criteria, so it's not reusable anywhere on site. We can't do it anyway because it's in a riparian area. So that represents the amount of overburden that we have to remove to get down to this red zone, which is the contaminated zone that's buried underneath all that material. And we found that kind of universally throughout the site. There's areas where we have clean material on top of dirty material. And then there's a base of the excavation. This is on the bottom of the excavation. And then you have, this is next to the trail. We have contamination from the surface all the way down to about 15 feet below ground surface. So there's this fairly large amount of material out there that is above the removal criteria that needs to be excavated. Some of it's exposed on the surface. Some of it we have to take overburden and waste off the top to get to that underlying material. So now what we do is we take that groundwater model that we had and we learn out and say, how much water do we have to remove to draw it down so we can excavate this material? And how far out under the interstate does that extend? How does it extend out underneath the Butte Visitor Center? And if we do that for a few months at a time, does it represent a problem? Will we see settlement in the foundation of the visitor center or settlement on the interstate? And things like that. So we're starting to look at that right now. We have a geotechnical engineer on board who is very experienced with these kind of things and will help us make an assessment if we need more data, if we already know enough. So just conceptually, that's kind of what the different layers look like out there right now. Groundwater dewatering model, we just took our excavation surface, fed it into the model, set up some dewatering points and started pumping until we at least reach the bottom of our excavation surface. Now we have some tweaking to do. We know we don't have this thing perfect, but it allowed us to start taking a look at what preliminarily the dewatering rates might be. And we're looking at initial pumping rates in the 600 to 1,000 gallon per minute range to dewater the area north of George Street, and initially around 800 gallons per minute down to 400 gallons per minute or so in the area south of George Street. And what's nice to see about this is we can pump it down over a period of, say, 5 to 10 days, and we start getting close to our long-term pumping rates. So the model that's been shared with us, we think is really good. It's a great tool for us to have in terms of developing the excavation plan. We have to figure out how to manage this water. This water either has to go to the Butte treatment lagoons, but it probably isn't of high enough quality that we can discharge directly to the stream, so we have to manage the water. And there's a limited capacity at the Butte treatment lagoons. So the volume of water that we pump out of here, we need to fit this project in the right sequence with all the other projects in the corridor so we don't overwhelm the Butte treatment lagoon. So understanding how long it's going to take to do this, how long it's going to take us to do the excavation, and how it fits in with all the other projects in the corridor is critical. So we need this information so that now we can sit down with the other people that are designing projects, put all the pieces together, and come up with a plan that can work for all the projects in the corridor. So, key findings. The volumes that we found are very close to what was listed in the consent decree. They're not that far off. You know, a few 100,000 cubic yards range. That's good news. We don't have a whole lot more to do, so that's a good thing. We had really good to excellent recovery from the sonic borings. We feel very good about the data that we collected. Like I mentioned before, we didn't have very good in situ XRF correlation to the laboratory. Our ex situ, where we took it out, dried it, and sieved it, and then did it in a little bit more controlled manner, we had really good correlations with the lab. We ran a passing bad block regression on those samples. Good inter method correlations, and we feel pretty good about developing that into a tool that will help us during construction to verify removals and get a good read on the bottom of the excavation so we can continue with the next construction steps without having to wait for laboratory data. And it'll lead to a more robust verification data set when we get to construction. Good results we feel from the groundwater model. Very limited municipal waste. We have mapped it out where we saw it on the surface and we encountered it in the borings. And we'll include that. We know about where to look for it. From some of those samples, we found some materials that would be considered suspect ACM in Montana because of Montana's asbestos rules. We were able to segregate those materials out, submit it into a laboratory. None of those came back as ACM. So that's good, but we'll still look out for it, but it means it isn't a major contingency that we have to deal with, but we have to be aware of it during construction. No hydrocarbons found so far. Again, we are aware of it. The other thing is that overburden is not reusable. That means everything we take out of there has to go to a repository someplace, and we have to come up with enough borrow material off-site to backfill it or bring it back up to whatever it's going to be, wherever the creek's going to be and what the corridor is going to look like in the future. So those are the key findings so far. Next steps, going through this one more time. PDI ER this spring, phase 2 if needed in the summer. Maybe an addendum sometime this fall. This remedial design work plan, I would hope to see it go out this spring or summer sometime to lay out the next steps. Additional design investigations whenever needed. Remedial design probably starting in early 2024 or mid 2024 going through the end of 2025. And again, if you look at all the submittal steps in there, you'll see why that schedule is 18 months long. You got 4 submittals with at least 3 to 4 review cycles per submittal level. So you're looking at 16 rounds of review to get from the beginning of the design process to the end of the design process. That just takes some time. And then remedial action, I put 2 years in there. I think that if it was just a simple excavation project, you could go out there and dig all that material out of there in a year and bring some material back and be done with it. But when you're dealing with a 42-inch sanitary line that the city of Butte relies on, and the power lines and the water and things like that, I think it's probably safer at this point in time to assume you're gonna have some spillover into a second construction season, at least, especially when you get around to thinking about reconstructing a stream channel on wetlands and plantings and things like that, and getting the vegetation established. I think it's probably more realistic at this point in time to think of it as happening over 2 construction seasons. You're not gonna wanna start this one in April. It's so wet down there. You're not gonna wanna start in April and try to be shut down through April, May, and June. We're gonna wanna start this and work this in the drier parts of the season when the dewatering is more easily managed and construction is a little bit easier. Close out probably 2030 if I lay it out on schedule. This is just a graphical view of the same thing. The schedule that was on the previous slide. It just kind of shows where we are right now. We completed the PDI work. We're working on the evaluation report. Phase 2 would happen this summer, and hopefully start remedial design sometime late this year, early next year. Finish it at the end of 2025. Go to bidding and award hopefully in early 2025. Start the remedial action probably mid 2025. Wrap up in 2020, the end of 2026. A couple of years at O&M maintenance and things like that. So realistically, looking at the complexity of this project, that's without having more knowledge of what's going on right now. That's kind of what we're looking at overall as a schedule at this point in time. So I don't know if I took too much time or not, but we're to the question.
You're great. So we'll go ahead and take questions from the council first and then
Sure.
open it up to the public.
Okay.
Do you have any questions from the council? Go ahead.
Go back to the findings sheet.
Yeah.
So how close is close in your first sentence there?
Close in, less than 10% difference. No, we'll call it 15% difference.
So the original projections were in the 300,000 cubic yard range. Correct?
It was closer to 170 or 200,000.
$200,000.
200,000. Yeah.
So we're finding that those previous assumptions were at plus or minus, or just plus 10% on?
I would say I'm within 10% of that number right now.
The likelihood of being less is just as great as being more than the original assumption?
It depends on where exactly you draw the outer boundaries of it, and that's some discussions I think that we're gonna have to have with the city, in terms of what you'd want to do with the trail, or digging material from underneath the trail, or leaving the trail back and bump the volume up or down. If we leave certain utilities in place because they're critical and we can't physically remove them, because of the material that you'd have to leave around those and slope down to the bottom of the excavation, that could reduce the volume down. So it's not, and the other thing about that, John, it's not just a pure volume thing. Some of those involve time. But so exactly how we want to execute this, exactly what we want to remove, working with stakeholders will affect that volume estimate. That's why I'm dancing around a little bit, because it depends exactly what you want to accomplish.
And I think just to add to that, what we're comfortable, to speak on the utilities piece of it, looking at the sewer line, and if we need to leave some material behind because of the concern about the integrity of the line, or if we remove, if we need to leave a buffer around that, then that skews some of those. It changes the volumes a little bit, but those are some of the conversations that we need to have now that we know what the initial investigations look like, and working with the partner agencies and the stakeholders to be able to kind of look at what level of risk is worth leaving or what needs to come out. And then that will drive whether we do additional removals around some of those areas. And the trail's another one, trail configuration, that sort of thing.
Excuse me, can I remind everybody to state your names?
Oh, yeah.
We are recording, so people online know who's talking.
Maybe while we're talking about this, could we go back to that cross-section slide I just had a question on that. So on this one, where you were talking about whether to take the trail out or not, that looks like the thickest amount of waste right there under the trail. And do you know
in that
what the,
particular spot?
okay,
It varies a little bit. It's kind of all over the place, but that is, it's one good example of the variability that you see out there. We look at the data and we can look at it not only vertically, but we can look at it horizontally and identify areas that have the largest mass associated with them or the highest concentrations associated with it too. So we need to take a little bit more detailed look at that. We have this big rough cut at everything right now, but we haven't really had time to dive into that level of detail. Does that make any sense?
yeah, I guess my question just was, whether that will get removed and what, does it extend back further than that, or is it just right at the trail, or do you know that?
We don't have a lot of data outside those red lines,
Okay.
because that's kind of the limit of the area that we were allowed to investigate. But by drilling borings right along that edge, we know that we have material from the surface to a good depth, and we know that there's going to be material outside that red line we probably can't remove.
Okay.
Because we can't dig a vertical wall there.
Yeah.
We're gonna have to slope it at some point. We're gonna have to cover that and treat that and do things like that to make it protected.
Okay.
But there are gonna be materials out there that we physically are unable to excavate.
So there will be some waste material in contact with groundwater that gets left.
I'm thinking that's a very high likelihood.
Okay.
I don't know if I should say that right now, but that's the reality. I'm looking at this data and I don't know how else to interpret it.
Okay.
This is Katie with DEQ. Just to add to that, so I think that's part of our ongoing conversations and us bringing this information forward. There's a lot of decisions that we're gonna have to make on whether is it better to leave waste in place in contact with groundwater? What does that look like? Are we still meeting the requirements and the freestyle and the CD? So I don't think we have a definitive yes or no to that yet. I think one of our goals is, as we get this information developed and the report out there, being able to share that with you all as stakeholders, and then coming back and having these additional conversations about this is what we found, what does this look like? And working together to figure out what is worth leaving in place, and what is worth removing so that we ensure remedy gets done the right way, but we're still being protective. So yeah, I think those are great questions that we will look to kind of others to help us kind of work through as we move forward on this project.
Okay.
And I thought others, this is Flugge guy from DEQ, sorry, thought others were working on a groundwater remedy optimization to address area that will have tailings left in place, contact with groundwater. I believe so.
Go ahead, Bill.
Bill Callahan, BNRC. Have you guys been able to determine, so you're gonna dewater everything, so that you can remove the waste? Have you been able to determine how quickly that groundwater is gonna recharge, and if it's gonna be more than the wastewater treatment plant can deal with? What would be the next step in dealing with that?
We haven't gotten that far yet. The water quality is generally not terrible underneath here. It's not as terrible as some other areas, but it's also not good enough that we can just discharge directly to the stream. I don't know if there's what BMP is available to remove dissolved contaminants. So if we can't design our system in segments small enough to send to treatment lagoons what it can accept, then we would have to look at other treatment alternatives on site to pre-treat it or something like that, so we could discharge it. We don't want to go down that route. I think we're going to do everything we can to design that out of it.
Yeah, so, but at this point in time, we don't really know what the groundwater recharge rate is going to be, even if you do that in small segments, or.
Well, I think we have a pretty good handle on that through the model. I think the model is our model calibration runs really quite good, and it's a very well-developed model. I mean, it's not perfect, no groundwater model is perfect, but I think the model that we have is adequate for us to project that. We will know about how, after we reconstruct it, and once we know what the material we use to reconstruct the area are, I think we should be able to project fairly closely how soon it's going to recover after we, wrap up the project. There's plenty of water down there.
So I guess one other question kind of on that, on that, line, Elizabeth Erickson with BNRC. Are you gonna go out and do some pilot testing to ensure that what the groundwater model's telling you is actually what you're gonna encounter in the physical earth?
If we feel that we need to, we will. Recent pump test data has been provided to us. We've evaluated that in the model. And we looked at it, the effects from that pump test extended under the creek into the area that we are looking at dewatering. So we have some data already available that's been shared with us from other people that gives us a pretty good feeling that the model is adequate for us for design purposes for this area. If we come to the conclusion during this next model run where we're at right now that we need to do more pump tests within that area out there, that might be another investigation where we would say, yeah, we're going to run a couple more pump tests just to get a better handle on the groundwater extraction rates. But the models that we have right now, we feel pretty comfortable with at this point in time.
Elizabeth?
Go ahead. Hang on, sister. I'll get you next.
Thanks.
Go ahead, John.
John McKee, BNRC. Couple questions. It's coming in concert of how you're saying we need to work in concert with all the other cleanup that's gonna happen in this area. And it went back to a comment you made about trucks taking up to the mine waste repository, right? So you talked about 200,000 cubic yards. You're talking about 14,000 trips in a 10 to 14 yard cubic yard dump truck. So I guess the concern I'm starting to have, and it's something I think, you know, I've been wanting to start sharing with the city too, is that we talk about your project, we talk about another project, and we talk about another project that's all happening down there. We're talking 50, 60, 70,000 trips going up and down the hill. And I'm starting to get curious about the town's ability to sustain that without you guys coming together with a better plan about how to get there other than just service streets. I don't think the uptown could sustain all of these projects and, you know, 50 to 100,000 dump truck runs in the next decade successfully. So I don't really feel like you guys have adequately explored the impact to Butte to that, especially in concert with the other things that are going to be happening.
Yeah, I'll respond to that a little bit. This is Katie with DEQ. I agree, that's a big concern for us, and we've, you know, Doug and I recently talked about this and just what repository options might be out there that don't include us having to run trucks on the street. And so as we move forward with some of these additional investigations that Joel has talked about, that's a part of that, is how can we get waste removed and hauled off without running at least our trucks on those roads, or what does those haul roads look like so that we can minimize that impact. Again, we're still in the earlier phases of that because we're hoping, there's obviously a lot of moving parts about the repository down in Butte, and we're aware of that. So trying to figure out what our part looks like and what other alternatives might be. And so we've tried to be a lot more engaged with NRD on this project because of their experience on the Parrot and using MR and their property, you know, working with them. We haven't, you know, ruled that out either, but we're still in those early conversations. So I think that the point that you bring up is extremely valid, and that's a concern that we have. I don't have a ton of concrete information on how we would minimize that, but as part of what as we move forward, that would be what we present in the design information, and then get feedback again from members of the community and stakeholder groups, because it is going to be disruptive, and it's safer for us to keep trucks off of the public roads, and it's a lot better for the town of Butte if we can do that. So we're looking into some options for that.
And I'll just add, those are exactly the kind of analysis that you would have as appendices in that design report. It's not just the design and drawings of plan. You would analyze those kind of things to make sure that you've covered those bases and responded to the questions of stakeholders like yourself.
And as this is Katie with DEQ, as we develop that information, that is stuff that will be readily available for the public to review, and you guys as stakeholders, and that's just our commitment and how we will roll things out. So at the 30% to 96%, all that stuff, that's stuff that we will have as part of all our evaluation.
Not everything will be in the 30%. Make it bigger. Make it bigger.
If I may, this is Eric with Butte-Silver Department of Reclamation. John, that's one of our major concerns as well, and it's a major component of our repository siting committee is the safety of our community and the degradation of the roadways. So my recollection is it's Atlantic Richfield's responsibility to run the repository, and we're in that process now. But that is one of the most weighted factors of that criteria in going to a new repository location is the impacts to our community, not only safety, but including our infrastructure.
Sister, you had a question?
Yes, Sister Mary Jo McDonald. And my question goes back to the walking trail and the contaminants are underneath that walking trail and what to do about it and how we should do it. My one thing is we need to do the remediation complete. And if it means redoing the walking trail, we redo the walking trail. Because we're talking about 15, 20 years down the path and the money will have all been spent and there will be no more funds to redo it again later. So you found that out from the Aerostone Park and Deer Lodge, that some things begin to surface and the ground changes. So let's do it right. And if it does mean we have to change the walking trail, we change the walking trail.
So can we go back to the key findings sheet again? So this overburden that would be taken out does not meet standards for reuse on the black of John Sesso, board member. Does not meet the criteria because of the presence of the metals or because it's all in the floodplain.
Presence of various things and texture. There's also textural requirements in those tables about what can be reused and what purposes, and some of it didn't meet the textural requirements and it didn't meet the metals requirements for a variety of reasons. It just didn't meet the requirements for the borrow materials, the general and vegetative background materials in the freestyle.
Follow, sure. I'm trying to nail down in my head whether or not it's being thrown out for reuse because this particular site is entirely in the floodplain. I mean, there's a sort of a shortage of topsoil in this general valley. And so I'm trying to ask in your preliminary review what the presence of the metals are. I understand texture and I understand that you can't put anything really, quite frankly, back into a floodplain. But there are other places that this could be extremely useful than trucking it up to the repository if the metals are not out of line with the standards.
You can look into that.
Yeah, Katie with DEQ, I mean, I think.
Well,
Yeah, we're open to it. Go ahead and finish here.
well, I'm not asking to look into it, please. I don't want you to do any more research than you're already doing, but I thought you were telling us in these key findings that in your testing that you have data now on the characterization of the materials that are going to be slated for removal. And didn't that include a profile of the metals content?
It did. Like I said, we have that information. We looked at it from the standpoint of could we reuse it on this site?
Right.
We didn't look at it from the perspective, could it be reused on another site?
Okay.
We haven't looked at it from that perspective and we certainly could.
Well, I would encourage us to start thinking holistically about all 7 projects in the corridor, not just yours. And so, or even on other places, non-Superfund areas, if there is some good soil here that meets standards, doesn't have high metals, and could be used for other purposes.
Their minutes of their meeting.
Could, possibly reuse that site, not only reduce the trips to the repository, but also to, everything has to go somewhere is the point. And, whether it goes up there or gets reused somewhere else, safely and effectively, it should be kept in mind.
That's not an unreasonable ask. It's not difficult to do and there's some potential win-wins there. So I don't see any reason why we wouldn't.
So can I, look at the timeline chart?
Okay.
And maybe this question is for you. Katie, is it?
Yeah.
You have any relations to Russ Forward?
It's my father.
Your father-in-law. Yeah, well, you might want to include him on.
I'll let it know.
But, I guess, you know, and I'm not gonna hide my disappointment in the fact that this is as far as we are after a full 3 years. And that's been said and discussed previously. I'm glad to hear we're here now. I have two issues, two questions about the chart, whether or not this is a worst case scenario and that there are opportunities to do better, especially with respect to today. And it would be a lot more comforting if we could get this design investigation and the remedial design steps done in this calendar year and even into the early 25, so that we could have the opportunity to bid this before the end of 25. Is that possible?
This is Katie with DEQ. So I think when we looked at the timeline and scheduling, we tried to be conservative, knowing the review times are what really drive a lot of this process. And that means for us, we're gonna really try and front load conversations with EPA, with NRD, and try to work through some of these issues so that when it gets to design review or, you know, parts of this process for review, hopefully that speeds things up. We will have some limitations there, but, yeah, I mean, I think there are some constraints that we will have. And then also looking how it fits with the rest of the corridor projects, the keys of that too. And I think that we have to be really cognizant. I'm not opposed to going, you know, we don't have a specific order in our mind that we have to go, but we also want to just be cautious of what the treatment plant can handle. That's got to factor into some of our decisions on the timelines. And so we're trying to put all those pieces into place and how it fits with the rest of the corridor, knowing we may go sooner than that. And that's what we want to be ready to go when the timing is right for us to go. And timing will also be, you know, water levels and stuff like that.
So my last question, Madam Chair, is along those lines, the interaction between DEQ on this project and DEQ's involvement and role in the other corridor projects. Now, it was my expectation that you would be at every design table with the rest of the corridor projects, so that every opportunity to integrate those decisions, particularly with respect to the discharge of the dewatered water to the lagoons, but also questions about haul routes, questions about repositories. I hope I just misheard you, but it would be ill-advised if DEQ was in their own room trying to decide haul routes and repositories independent of the conversation that's already going on, somewhat intractable conversation going on with respect to haul routes and repositories for the rest of the waste in the corridor. Now, it was also my understanding that there's that DEQ in managing and operating this project gets to rely on and piggyback the repository selected for the other projects. And so that's still the case. And so could you just comment and assure us that there is a full integration going on as we speak, that your design and your timeline is seen and understood by them, and vice versa, that you know and have seen the timelines for the other 7 projects?
Yeah, this is Katie with DEQ. So we participate in all of those meetings, and we have our project manager who coordinates directly with Logan, and they work, and we have project team in attendance at all those conversations and all the design meetings for the other corridor projects, and being able to tie those back to our specific projects. So when I say that we're working on repository, that sort of thing, we're seeing how things scope out. But if we're a couple of years down the road, I mean, that also has to go into our project timelines and our schedule. So we are part of those conversations with the corridor projects. We are also keeping them apprised of where we're at in the design and the investigation process. And so tying those together, there's still a lot of unknowns with haul routes, repository, that sort of thing, as those are being worked through with the repository siting study. but we are part of those conversations and we are making sure that they're aware of where we're at on these and where they're at and how we can tie those together when we get to the right percentage of the projects.
And if I could, this is Kevin Stone with DEQ, just to add a couple of things. I think what we're saying is keeping some options open.
Yeah.
I mean, we don't know, you know, the repository has not been settled yet. If there are options that are economically feasible and otherwise superior to the repository that AR selects, we're at least open to that. So we haven't foreclosed. We're not putting all of our eggs in one basket to say that that's the only option. And that's where we're talking with NRD, right? And what was done with IDMR, if that's an option. Right, we want to make sure, you know, we're doing what's best for safety, economic feasibility, all of those types of things. And then just as far as timing, you know, I think as Katie hinted at, there's a lot of critical path elements to identify what the corridor sequencing is going to be that have not been settled yet. We've been saying all along, the goal is, and we feel like we're still on the timeline to be ready to step up to the plate when our number gets called.
So who is the DEQ representative in the rest of the design meetings?
Yeah.
Daryl Reed, our
Katie Garson with DEQ. So Daryl Reed is our project manager for all the other things that are Butte related. And when we received the Blacktail Creek, the HydroGeoLogic model that just came out, Daryl and Logan both worked on that along with our consultants. And then we were able to share some of that information. So Daryl is our project manager on that one. And then certain technical meetings, you know, will include the section supervisor as part of those as others have. But he's our primary person in those.
I would say that we've also, the invitation's been extended to us as a consultant on the project to listen in on those things, so we're informed of what's going on, and we understand what's going on with the schedules as well. So some of this is born on that understanding of where things are.
That, go ahead, Corey.
Thanks, Elizabeth. Yeah, Courtney Young with BNRC. I just got a couple of questions about, first of all, collecting your sample. When you bore or core, do you cap the hole once you get the sample out?
Yes, we feel. Okay, move back open.
And then when it comes to the in situ measurement, I presume that's a handheld XRF?
It's a handheld XRF, yes.
And is there any way we can get information on how it's calibrated, what its accuracy is and detection limits?
Oh, absolutely. It's done according to EPA method 6200. There's a EPA standard method for doing that. The calibration procedures, the standards that we use to calibrate it are done, you know, once a day or multiple times a day per number of samples. There's reps, there's dupes, there's, you know, blind people get sent to the lab. There's a whole QA QC program.
Those are things that'd be nice to see.
Yeah, that would be documented in the pre-design investigation documentation report, and those procedures are described in the work plan and the quality assurance project plan for the project.
Do you use other labs for verification?
We send, you know, our labs go out to an EPA CLP approved lab. We used Energy Laboratories in Billings because they are approved to do it. They do their full calibrations. We have everything all the way down to instrument readouts available from this project. We ended up doing stage 2B data validation, which is very rigorous, more than normal. But it's we have a mountain of data if you would like to see it.
And then you also, any verification with other analytical techniques, ICP?
Well, the laboratory would use ICP for the solids, right? The extraction procedures for that, and this cold vapor atomic absorption for the mercury. Right. So that they use their laboratory, you know, it's atomic absorption, spectrophotometry for the metals, you know, ICP, and then the cold vapor for the mercury.
And so all these numbers are the ones that are plus or minus 15% of your assumptions.
When we calculate the volume based on what was in the CD, you know, that volume, our volume is based on the laboratory data. We collected the XRF data because it helps us understand what's going on in the field and make decisions on what samples to collect in the field. And it'll also, when we get the proper calibration, it'll help us predict whether or not we're done with the excavation in the field later, but we'll always be backing that up with a certain number of laboratory samples to build up that data set. There's a specific process involved in doing that.
And one quick last question. Why are you looking for asbestos? Just the safety of your people or?
No, it's something, there was material dumped out there. There were, in Montana, they make you look at anything that's not metal, glass, or plastic. So that means mortars, bricks, concrete, anything like that has to be tested for asbestos in Montana. Other states, not so much, but in Montana, you have to, and that's why we did it. We wanted to be in compliance with, what the way Montana does things.
Thank you.
We'll open it to the public. Go ahead.
Elizabeth, could I, one last one?
Hang on just one second, sister. We'll let Jim go and then I'll go back to you. Go ahead, Jeff.
Kambich, Butte-Silver, it just kind of, this is kind of a loaded question. I can follow this, but over the past couple of years, there's been a couple numbers thrown around. You guys have an engineering estimate of what this is gonna cost? I know there's been some numbers thrown around, I know, in the last couple of years.
This is Katie with DEQ, and like Joel said, we don't have that yet, but we're really trying to hone that in over the next, I mean, in the near future, because we know that that's a big question that you all have, that numbers have been thrown out there, and so we're hoping, that we can get that honed in very soon and be able to share that with you guys, because I know that impacts, and also being able to share that with NRD, because, there's obviously, there's a combined interest there, so good question, that's something that is a priority for us, and we recognize that we have not been great at, sharing kind of the updates on that and transparent in where we're at. And that's one of our things that we're going to fix moving forward. And that cost estimate is part of that.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Oh, sister. Thank you. Go ahead, sister.
It deals with the very thing that was just asked, but I was looking at the financials that you gave to us, and they're kind of vague in many areas because you don't know exactly when it started, the project was started, and how much has been spent thus far, and where you are financially today with the accounting, and what the projection is on how much of that funding that was allocated will be used and what the leftovers might be.
This is Katie with DEQ. That's a great question. So I was going to walk through the financials if we have a minute, be able to kind of explain. I recognize they're somewhat vague, but I want to be able to provide context to those financials. And then again, just we're working on what that estimate looks like. And then that way we can come back and be able to share that with you guys.
Kevin, you know how much we spent.
You know how much we
That's
spent.
not safe.
How much we got projected, yes. Yeah.
Okay. All right.
Cunneen, NRDP. Joel, can you give us an idea of what kind of concentrations you were finding? Were they for all the contaminants of concern? And could you tell us a little bit about mercury as well?
Not a lot of mercury. In a few random places, there's some mercury and it's fairly low in general. Copper and zinc ranged, as high as 8,000-10,000 parts per million in some areas, but those were kind of anomalies. More of it was more towards the middle. The cleanup criteria in the table are pretty set in stone. But in general, we didn't find extremely high concentration. We didn't find reduced, raw tailings out there, which is a good sign. And so I would just say that they varied throughout the site. And when I say the context, you look at that red bar, the concentration could vary from the top to the bottom quite a bit. Just be higher in the middle than it is at the top or the bottom. It just depends.
Thank you.
Kind of turn back. Did I answer your question?
Yes.
I think then we'll go ahead and go to financials.
And I would offer up, this is Katie with DEQ.
We get this thing.
Yeah, I'll do this.
Yeah, we can PDF it and send it over to you. Absolutely.
Okay.
Again, Katie with DEQ. I would offer up, as you guys have questions that come to mind, please reach out to us and we'll make sure that you guys have our contact information, but we want to be able to answer questions. And also as we work through some of the stuff that we're finding, how do we address it? What does that look like? So that it's the best for the community. So looking at the financials, so I sent in the packet, they included two reports that, show from our fiscal year, so I think it's first pages of the budget in the packet that you guys got. So you'll see at the top of the one that says statement date 7/1/2022 to 6/30/2023. So that captures our fiscal year end from the start of the 23 fiscal year to the end of the fiscal year for 2023. And on that, you will notice that, so if you look at the first line that says, that shows our assets, so 10000 assets, it'll show you our beginning balance, which was 20,885,425. And if you look through, you'll see what assets we had in the bank. You'll see, so cash in the bank is interest receivable. And so that's some of the earnings that we had. And then participant STIP investment is kind of the key one there because it shows our short-term investment that we received. And we're happy because our short-term investments did very well in interest earned. And so if you forecast out and look to the final column on that page, it shows our total of $21,396 and $396,091.17. And so we actually earned significant interest on that over the course of that fiscal year. Based off of that, you can see there's a few other criteria on there that shows our revenues, again, the STIP participant earnings, and then our expenditures, which is salaries, employee benefits, other services, communications, which is 0 for this project, any travel, rent, and other expenses. And so if you have questions, I will do my best to answer them. And if I can't answer them, then I will get the answer to you after I talk to our fiscal team. So then looking ahead to the next page, which captures 7/1/2023 to 12/31/2023, that is our current fiscal year that we are in. And so this shows you guys have basically a 1.5 year snapshot of the budget for Blacktail Creek. And so again, looking at that 10000 assets line, we started the fiscal year, which is July 1, with $21,396,000 and $396,091.17, which you'll see matches our end total on into fiscal year 23. And so that just shows expenditures that we had, and some of the interest earned. Again, we continue to earn good interest on this account, and this, our short-term investments have done well. And so currently we are sitting at $21,632,689. So we continue to earn really good interest on this account. However, we don't want to bank on that as far as like, we're going to continue to see that because we've had projects in the past, street side tailings they earned fantastic interest. Clark Fork River has had a very opposite effect. And so we want to make sure that we're still looking at, very close budget and projections as we move forward, and just keeping an eye on interest earned and being conservative, knowing that might not stay the same, each quarter of our investments. And so then again, you'll see as you kind of work your way down, it's set up very similar to the previous report out. And then just a couple numbers that I will share with you guys is a couple of the contracts and task orders that we had this year. One was with Brown and Associates to do some surveying out there and be able to look at, surveying the data points where we collected samples at and just the overall area so that we can create that design surface and basically take that data collected from the investigation, use the surveyed surface and build out our removal boundary or our removal quantities. And so that was part of our contract. We have, you'll see those at the bottom of the page there. That contract ends on May 1st of this year. We still have $6,299 that are part of that task order that are included that have not been spent at this point. And then you'll see our contract with HydroGeoLogic, which is the team that Joel works with and for us on. And that one is through the end of 2024 of this year. And there's still $232,587 remaining on that current task order. Figured you guys would want to know what we spent on their services and task orders to date. And I can absolutely get this sent over to you guys via email, but I pulled these numbers today and we were kind of heading out, so I wanted to make sure I provided them to you. So for task orders spent, and this is for all work done collectively on Blacktail Creek. So for fiscal year 2022, there was 54,748 spent in task orders. In fiscal year 2023, there was 234,358. So that would have been from July 1 of 22 to June 31st of 2023. And then this last year, which is July 1st of 2023 till current, so a 6-month snapshot that we have, there's been $150,469 spent so far. And then we've still got that 232,587 left in the existing task force.
Kevin, could I just summarize, I guess, and say, you've got a fair bit of our pre-design work done, and due to gaining some favorable interest, we have more money than we started with. So.
So my last.
Sorry.
So with that, we recognize that our interest has done well. We don't want to bank on that because we've seen on other projects, we know that that can change drastically. And so as we move forward, we will share budget information with you guys. We'll be sharing it with NRD on a more frequent basis. And we will make sure that when we come and report out to you guys, you understand where our balances sit. Because we know that that is of interest to Butte and the community down here. And it's information that we have available that we can certainly share that I know we haven't done as well in the past. So that is a commitment that we'll make to you guys as a council moving forward. But we're happy with what our investments have shown at this point. And we feel like we're still sitting in a very good spot to be able to, have plenty for the cleanup and then access to be able to get other work done in Butte.
Okay. Good. Some questions on the financials from the council?
Yes, I have a question.
Okay, go ahead, sister.
Sister Mary Jo, BNRC Council. My question is just tell us what the other services category is, please. Because on the one is 230,000 and the other it's 192,000.
This is Katie. That is a great question. I believe that is the other services are our task order invoice totals, which could include a combined amount for the task orders that we have out there for the project. But I will confirm that and I will get you an answer for sure. But my understanding is that is what incorporates the task orders.
Thank you.
Yeah, just Kevin, again, hearing you run through those numbers, that roughly matches up with the contract.
Yeah, but I'll double check and make sure that that includes everything.
Quick question. So there's 232 left for HydroGeoLogic for the rest of this year. Will that be enough to cover the PDI report and the other things that they have on their scope of work for the rest of this year?
At this point, yes, we believe so. Again, we'll have to kind of assess that if there's new investigations that may need to occur or anything like that, then obviously that changes the scope of work a little bit. But I think right now with the budget that we have, we feel comfortable with that. And we did estimate a little bit high knowing that costs were going up when we were entered into that task order, but we will continue to reassess that with them. And if we have some of those changes, again, that's something that we'll be sure we report out to you guys, so that you know where we're at with any amendments or task order modifications that occur.
That, I think we can open it to the public. Any questions from the public on the financials? All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
I think we're up to that.
I think so.
Okay, I'm just gonna stay up.
Okay.
And then I'll bring Amy up with me. And like I said, if you guys have questions on any of the financial pieces of the project, please just give us a call. Make sure that you guys have my card. And we'll get you guys Kevin's card and reach out to us because we want to be able, we're working together on these things. Okay, so we're gonna switch gears to talk a little bit about streamside tailings. And I know Amy and I know that one of the things that's been of interest to this group and understandably so was the 5 million that was being discussed about transfer from the streamside tailings account. And so I just wanted to provide a little bit of an overview of current status, and we've got project manager here that can correct me if I'm wrong on anything, but I just wanted to be able to give an update on where things are at as we're going through, kind of wrap up, and then Amy will talk a little bit more about the budget and where we're at with all of that. So right now, current status, our team is still working on some mop-up areas and some additional removals for the project. We're hoping to continue to ramp that down as we go. Remedy is not yet complete, but again, we're looking at getting that closed out over the next couple of years to at least get us into O&M, operations and maintenance. One of the things that we have found through our ongoing surface water monitoring is that there have been some exceedances of copper that we're investigating. And that is something that is kind of a concern to us because right now we're not meeting, we are not meeting the surface water quality goals that we need to be meeting. We're still in the investigation phase as to where that might be coming from and what that looks like. And we've got a team working with, our own team. EPA is super engaged in that process as well. And so we're hoping through some monitoring that we do this year, we'll be able to hone that in a little bit closer. And again, we're happy to come back and be able to provide an update on that because I think, that might be of interest. So as of right now, we are not meeting our performance goals for surface water in some of these areas. And I will provide you guys with, if you don't mind. So we've got two tables here. One is this, and I apologize for those online. We will send them to you, especially our board, the council members. But there's some data that we've been collecting that shows what some of the exceedances for copper look like, the locations of them, and then it shows that it's more of a chronic and not acute scenario. And so we're trying to work with EPA to figure out what is actually happening on the creek. So that we can meet our water quality standards. And so with that, we need to also look at how our vegetation is doing, whether that is contributing to some of these areas of concern, and not reducing our O&M or our monitoring until we get to that point. And so that's one of the pieces that we're kind of at a sticking point with DEQ at, is we need to be able to show that our remedy requirements are being met and that we are meeting water quality standards and the revegetation requirements. And we're still monitoring those. If you look at, and Amy will walk through the budget on this, if you look through our long-term projections, operations and maintenance and monitoring is a really big cost for the project. Eventually, over time, we'd love to be able to reduce that down a little bit. We're just not there yet. And it'll take EPA's approval to be able to do that. And so we are having those conversations with them. We're having the conversations with NRD. But before we can reduce any of those costs, which are kind of the bigger ones long-term, we need to have sign off on that and just agreement that the reduction makes sense. And so that's kind of where Streamside is at this point. Obviously it's doing really well from a remedy standpoint, but there's still some areas that we're needing to look further into, and the water quality component is something that we're obviously concerned about, along with EPA and others, and just figuring out what is actually happening as far as us being able to meet those standards.
Excuse me.
Yeah.
The numbers on the chart here represent the number of times that misses the standard. What?
Correct. So the yellow will delineate, I believe the yellow shows when we've got,
You'll just look here.
yeah, so the yellow is it exceeds the chronic aquatic life standard, and then the red is where it exceeds the acute.
Right, and then in the numbers here on the right, 0.034. What that means, it misses the standards that many times, or it's that much over, under, what is the actual number?
So that number is the standard, and I will have to.
That's the sample result.
It's just, yeah. And so I can get you what the numeric numbers, the criteria is supposed to be. But that is where it shows that it exceeded that numeric, and so the 0.034 is what the sample number showed. And we should have included what the threshold was.
So they're milligrams per liter up above, but is it one sample per each of those locations per site ID?
So it's one sample per that year, but we're seeing a trend over the last couple of years.
Okay.
And so this is representative of the 2022 data, because this is what we just got finalized. We're hoping to have the 2023 data that will be able to verify whether this is an ongoing trend or not, but the 21 data also showed that. And so we've got, I believe, 4 years of this data set that's showing where we had those balances.
Does it always show that first quarter being the highest?
Yeah.
Okay.
Which is also part of why we're doing our additional budget consultation right now is,
Okay.
you know, trying to hone that in with what the time of year and that quarter and why we might be seeing it then.
Is it calendar or fiscal year quarters?
Calendar. Yeah, good question. We'll verify that when we do that's around the news, yeah.
Okay, so in quarter 3, 0.018 exceeds.
Mhm.
But before that, 0.019 does not. So does that also take into account volume then, or?
Yes, it does look at volume and like time of year that the sample is, yeah.
It still says it's hardness, water hardness is factored in.
Mm. You better say it.
Can you all hear me in the back? Am I loud enough? Okay. I'm going to talk about the funding piece of streamside tailings and the commitment that DEQ had made in 2020 and where we're at now. In 2020, DEQ committed to a transfer of $5 million in funds from streamside tailings funding. And I visited with you last May and mentioned that we were working through some requirements at that time that would have to be met before we could make a transfer. And I need to cover one of those tonight that's really critical and is key to this discussion. And that is that DEQ has to have adequate funding to complete remedy and then do operation and maintenance for 15 years. It is 15 years, correct? I'll make sure I have that right. Okay, 15 years. So that is our responsibility that we have to meet before we can agree to any transfer, before EPA could sign off on any transfer. So what I'm going to do is walk through a spreadsheet that's in your packet, and I think you're all already probably turned to it. The label on the top is SST Funds Transfer Analysis, August 2022. And so I'll go through that spreadsheet. Then we'll talk about what was different between the projections that DEQ was looking at and what we were looking at in 2022. Then compare the 2022 projection to where we currently are, actually at the end of December. And then I'll be able to finish with what we can and can't commit to. So first of all, I just want to emphasize that these tables are best estimates of projecting out 15, almost 20 years into the future. So they're assuming fixed inflation, escalation, and interest rates. And they are simply an estimate, that our best estimate of future costs. We know that they'll change, they're our best estimate. And they do err on the side of caution because we have that obligation to complete the remedy and do operation and maintenance. So the first table is, as I mentioned, projections, projecting costs out to the future, to 2040. And I know it's tiny. I'm not going to ask you to be able to read everything in there, but I want to highlight some of the more important pieces. On the left side, and there are two tables here, I'll start with the one on top and then we'll talk about why the one below is there as well. But on the left side, you see categories of costs that we've got for our projects. And then below the green line, there are a couple of them, but below the first green line there is, we're looking at if we didn't have any transfer, then if you keep going down below the next green line is if there was a one-time, and again, we were looking at this in August of 2022. So that first one-time transfer, we were looking at that in 2023. Then we looked at transfer in different payments and looked at that over a couple different ways. So what you can see in this, and it's emphasized by the colors, if we didn't do any transfer, looking at that top table with the projected estimates projecting out, we would run out of money in 2036. So we would not be able to complete our operation and maintenance obligations. If we did do a one-time $5 million transfer, we would be out of money in 2031. So that's the top table, and then I'll move down to the next table. In this table, we started looking at, okay, well, we're going to complete remedies, so we know that we're going to be looking at some some reduced costs because we'll be going into operation and maintenance. So in this table, then we're looking at, we move into operation and maintenance in 2025, reducing costs by 50%. And then there's another reduction in 2035. So then if you go down below that green line again, if there's no $5 million transfer, then you get all the way out to the end of the project. And by the end of the project, we're estimating there would be $1.2 million left. On the flip side of that one, under the green line there, if we did a $1.5 million transfer, we would run out of money in 2031. And then you can see the two lines below that if it's broken out into payment. So that's what I wanted to point out for the August 2022. Now, when I got this, I said, all right, why is this different than what the department was looking at in 2020? So we did an analysis of the spreadsheet that was used in 2020 and the spreadsheet that was used. Oh, I'm sorry, I just looking up on my computer. Should I disconnect people online? Okay, I hit something. I just wanted to make sure I didn't screw it up for them. All right. For the analysis that we did, the key difference that we found is that in 2020, the budget used an inflation rate for the projection. The inflation rate was 0.5%. So while the 2022 budget uses a rate of 7%, and I believe that that rate of 7% was something that we determined in conjunction with the Board of Investments. So that wasn't a DEQ determination. That was something that we worked on with the State Board of Investments. So that was the primary difference. That's a huge difference. And if the 2020, and so that's, sorry, I want to just make one more distinction. We use this, the budget or the inflation rate of 7% calculates the projection just for years 2024 and 2025. Then we reduced it to 3%. If a rate of 3% had been applied to the 2020 budget, it would have shown that we would have run out of money in 2037 if the $5 million had been transferred. So there's your main distinction. There were a couple of other minor differences as well, things that were left out in the 2020 budget, but that was the big one. So the other one, the next sheet that I wanted to point out, and this gets to the fact I talked about how this is an estimate. This projection is an estimate. If you look, and I'll just tell you because I don't know if you'll be able to see it, but under 2024 interest rate, go down to, no, it doesn't matter which, no $5 million transfer. And we're in fiscal year 2024 right now. Our estimate at that point, this is just a year and a half ago, we were estimating that we would start the year at 15,600,000 roughly, and that we would end the year at over 12 million. But that next page, if you look at that, you can see that we ended. So this will actually be the middle of the fiscal year, but we ended 2023 at 16 million, roughly 16 million. So what I'm trying to point out is that with the projections that we have right now, I am not comfortable saying, yes, we can transfer $5 million at any one point in time. I'm not even comfortable saying we can transfer $1 million at this point in time. But what I can say is that we will continue to track the budget. We'll continue to make modifications where we can, cut down on monitoring as we move into the future, and to share this with you on an annual basis, or if you would like more often, and talk to you about where we are. And at five years down the road, we may be at a point where we look at the budget and say, yeah, okay, now we are comfortable. The budget has stabilized. We've been in operation and maintenance for 3 years, and we may get to that point. But at this point, I can't make that commitment and feel comfortable that DEQ will be able to fulfill our commitment to the state to finish remedy and then to the operation and maintenance. So I know that's not good news. I understand the gotta be disappointing, but that is what I need to share with you tonight. That's the questions. And the other thing I did want to point out is that we have been working with NRDP on this. We've both worked closely with these budgets. We've talked about them. NRDP has suggested areas where maybe we might be able to cut things down at some point. And we'll continue to work together on how we can be as cost effective as possible and still meet our obligations. Did I miss anything guys, in the back? Doug, sorry, what? Anything you want to say, Doug? Okay. Questions?
I got a question.
Go ahead, John.
The 2022, John Scessel, BNRC member, those are actuals. Correct?
Yes.
Those are actual numbers in the personal services and
Yes, that's correct.
so there was a $500,000 increase. So you spent $728,000 on O&M in 22. And you're only gonna spend 40,000 or did spend, isn't 23 done too?
2023 is done too, correct?
Yeah, so you spent 728 in 22. I'd like to know on what, and then it dropped to 40,000 in 23? Am I reading that right?
I think the 40,000, you're looking at anticipated O&M.
Yeah, well, I'm looking at that. I'm mostly looking at the 728,000 it's spent in 2022. I something must have gone wrong, or you must have done something that is more in the remnant cleanup area than O&M.
Yeah.
So, yeah, this is Katie with DEQ. That included some of the removals that we did, some of the hotspot removals, and I think there was even some vegetation. So yes, that included some of those additional removal costs.
So it's not really anticipated O&M, it's actually
Not at that.
not at that point,
Getting
okay.
out past, I mean, into,
Yeah.
even at that point, since we were working on this in 22, even the 2023 at that point was anticipated.
Okay, okay.
Amy, what is the source of the estimates in fiscal year 24 for the two large numbers, the 900,000 and the 1.5 million, and followed up by 2 million? That is something that is supposed to address this problem?
Katie, is that to address the monitoring?
Yes.
Yeah, so the mixed waste on parcel 26 with the 900,000 this year in 2024, and then I really, like, the site is not as good as it used to be. I think 4.
Sub area 4.
Sub area 4 remnant cleanup is the 1.5 million followed by the 50. Is 10 Katie.
Yeah, and this is Katie with DEQ. So that mixed waste on parcel 26, that includes if we need to remove it from and dispose of it at whether it's Opportunity Ponds. We're still trying to work with AR on some of those negotiations. And so that estimate is included because we do know that the mixed waste, something needs to happen with mixed waste. And that's part of then the parcel transfer that needs to occur after. And so there's kind of two parts to that. And that's what that number incorporates, deep work, that sort of thing for the transfer. The sub area SA4, sub area 4 remnant cleanup is some of the designs for some of the removals that have not happened yet that still need to happen. And so that incorporates some of the design and the removal costs around that 1.5 million.
It's Mary Jo, Elizabeth.
Go ahead, sister.
It's Mary Jo McDonald with the council. As I'm looking at this and I see our projections out to 2040, and if I look at some areas where we're still going to have surveying being done, and we have some other areas that are continuing to be funded since 2023, aren't some of these things going to go away as the cleanup continues and the remediation is done properly?
So this is Katie with EQ. Yes, However, the operable unit is set up to where sub areas don't go into O and M. The entire operable unit needs to go into O and M. And so as we're reducing some of these monitoring areas, we need to be able to show that we can show that a trend over, a sufficient amount of time to then get those areas reduced by EPA and putting proposals to them. But in some Superfund sites, you can reduce O and M based on the reach or the sub area. This one is for the entire operable unit, and so that's where we have to cost it out. And then that's where we'll work with EPA over the next few years to look at where we might be able to do a reduction if we can show that the remedy is working and performing as it needs to.
I guess I'm having a problem with this being projected out that way, because it would seem to me, once some of the remediation is done, some of these things should fall off this grid. And, it seems like we're still going to be in the hole come 2040.
Are you specifically speaking to, sorry, this is Amy, but surveying and wondering why surveying would be a part of operation and maintenance?
Well, I guess I'm wondering why all of them would be a part of operations. And as much as they are allocated, they're almost allocated the same amount as when they're doing the work right now.
Right, so that's why if you look in the table below, some of those costs, I guess surveying didn't go down, but maybe either Logan or Katie, could you guys speak a little bit to what operation and maintenance entails, just to give a clearer picture of why we're looking at costs out and the cost that we're looking at?
Yeah.
Part of our O and M, well, sorry, this is Logan Gunning from BEQ. Our yearly operation and maintenance inspection includes our 26 miles up and down, physical boots on the ground, inspecting the vegetation, other
Their prices.
and bridges and infrastructure, things like that. So we'll be doing that forever up until 2040. That's one, I don't know if that's cost or not, or.
Yeah, so this is Katie with DEQ. So part of our operations and maintenance, we need to look at vegetation criteria and make sure that we're meeting the remedial action goals that were set out in the ROD. And so that includes that we're getting adequate vegetation cover. It's not just a bunch of knapweed out there. We look at bank stability on the stream and make sure that vegetation has been able to establish itself. And then if the stream does move, we're comfortable with what that migration looks like. If we had a significant flood year 10 years from now and it wipes out a lot of the stream, then that would require us to go back and fix it potentially. But our assessment we need to include, is that going to be damaging to the remedy, or can we live with that as part of just natural movement in the stream? It also includes the surface water monitoring. And again, we're seeing those exceedances from copper right now, and we need to be able to meet that criteria in order for us to ever close out the site. And so those are some of the things that we look at over the course of O&M as we go into it. And it's 2,000 acres. It includes, monitoring weeds, the vegetation, the stream stability, what it's doing. And then like Logan said, bridges and, cover over the, just various areas. And so that's kind of the comprehensive look at our O&M. And those are criteria that we have to meet per the record of decision and ESD and the requirements that we went into for the settlement with EPA. And so part of this is us getting it on their radar and working with them now to figure out where we can do some of the reduction of costs. And as you look at these budgets, if there are things that seem strange, definitely we would like to hear that, because we can reassess as we move forward and figure out where we might be able to do some reduction and still have approval from EPA.
Well, I would think one would be under the water sampling, because you're still projecting in 2023 at 290,000 plus, and then you raise it up so you're into 300,000 in 2035, and we're up to 356,000 plus in 2040. So there's a increase in. At some point in time, some of the water sampling should have been completed long ago and the copper addressed in remediation rather than waiting for it to resurface again and us having to go back and redo the copper amounts that are found there. It just seems to me that this budget projects more intention on the groundwater's issues that are going to be faced when we should be addressing them in the front part of this budget.
Yeah, this is Katie with DEQ. I think that's a valid point. One of the things for us, the O&M and the surface water sampling, we do have specific metrics and stipulations of how our frequency of it into operations and maintenance to ensure we are meeting that remedy requirement and our goals for that. And so that's where you see those numbers increasing, because our monitoring actually does increase as we're trying to hone in what the remedy results look like. But I think that's where we're looking at where can we reduce those versus, so we projected a little bit high so that we can always reduce it, knowing that our funding is limited in this capacity. So if we can reduce that over time, then that'll paint us a better picture as far as projection. I think even over the next couple of years, we'll be able to hone that number in a little bit more.
This is Logan from DEQ. Our sampling requirements, I believe, are from the rod.
Yeah.
So for us to be able to drop any of those analytes, it will come with a rod modification, which time and money. And we have started talks just this year, and that's where we're starting with time and money. And I believe the way that spreadsheet is built up is just to look at an incremental increase just based on inflation as we all see as the years increase. So until we could get EPA approval to drop some of those analytes from our sampling suite, that number is going to continue to increase.
Is there plans to is this, so this chart's 18 months old? And is there a plan to kind of
Re-up it?
be a little more convincing if it was like current? And then what is the, so this chart assumes we're gonna make 2.5% since 2022, August of 22, it assumes it's plugged in that we're gonna make 2.5% on the balance.
That's what, yeah, that's,
So it's in here?
Yeah.
And the general inflation rate baked into the chart is 2.5% or 3%?
well, inflation for the first two are, I'm sorry, I think that was 24 and 25 was 7%. And then beyond that, it was 3%.
So the word escalation is same as interest rate?
Escalation, I actually looked up the definition of that word because I wasn't sure. Escalation rates are annual percentage increases applied to the previous year's energy savings, operational savings, and service pricing. That's the definition I found for escalation.
John, I've been running the math in the spread. And so like if you go like, I don't care, go to weed control, 26, 27, that escalation rate, the 3%, they're just applying that to previous year number to get to the next year's number. So like 103 goes to 106,090. They're just applying that 3% across there on the escalation.
So it's escalating 3% every year.
3% compounded on previous year.
So Madam Chair, it looks like we're not gonna get any money from you for quite a while.
Will help who's over.
Is there a review that we could sort of build in and say, update the chart through the fiscal year that just ended in July, which is 23, and get the real numbers in at least that column and the real numbers in 22 column, and then you know, we're already in 2024, so you should have a better number for the projected cleanup numbers that are big. Maybe in 25 or 26, we could, is it still an obligation, or was it always just a request and you're in charge of saying yes or no? It's not an obligation.
That's my understanding of, oh, Doug.
This is Doug Martin with the Natural Resource Damage Program. I have a couple questions, or a couple comments. One of these numbers, did come from Bureau of Investments. These are numbers that we used in the Park Fork, strategic plan, and this spreadsheet was updated, right after we got done doing that work. So those are numbers that came at that time. If you do remember, interest rates were high there and returns were not very good. As far as the commitment, this was a commitment that the governor did, make, in 2 restoration plans. It ran by this council as well as the Upper Park Fork River Basin Advisory Council. So the amendment was, part of the initial transfer, or no, not the initial transfer, the second transfer, and the amendment to both the DAO and the Upper Park Fork Restoration Plan. So there is a commitment there. If that commitment does change, we will have to revise those restorations.
I did not know that, thank you. But what we could do is, I think Doug, you guys do your financial updates every autumn, is that right?
For the Park Fork?
Yeah. For this group?
Oh, yes, we do those every fall for the BNRC.
We could do the same thing every fall and come back with an updated spreadsheet through the end of the fiscal year that had just ended. And visit with you, get your suggestions.
And then adjust.
Yep.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yep, we can do that.
And then if we did that next fall, that would adjust both 23 and 24 numbers probably, for at least 22 and 23 numbers from here. Yeah, because we only went through August of 22 on this one.
This is Katie with DQ. I think we can provide those updated numbers. Like, I think we can get that pulled together for you guys to see that.
Okay.
As part of, and it might be a couple of weeks, because our project manager, we're very busy and our fiscal staff, but we can get those updated numbers out to you next week and see what the current status is.
That'd be great. Thanks.
Question. I'm kind of curious about, maybe this is not even relevant. So there's $5 million that we don't know. It's gonna come back to streams, like whatever else. So we don't know how long it's gonna take. I mean, I can see your projections here and that kind of thing. Is there gonna be interest paid on that $5 million over this time so that it's not just the 5 million that has been sitting there since a couple of years ago and whatever else, or say that money doesn't come back until the end? I mean, that's a lot of money and there's a lot of interest that could be made on that money, but I don't see anything in the spreadsheets that tells me that.
I think I hear what you're saying, but let me know if this answers your question. So the $5 million that was committed, and it's good to know that the governor made that commitment. I did not know that. Very good to know. That money that was committed is part of the funding for DEQ's remedy and operation.
Right.
It's in the same pot of money. So whatever interest is gained on that money, and all of that money is being accrued. As far as a commitment for a $5 million transfer and then interest on top of that, I mean, I think it's just, we have to look at what we're going to be able to do when we get to a point where it looks like there might be enough to do that. I mean, so I can't say, yes, we'll transfer 5 million plus interest at some point. I just can't.
Yeah, okay, well, I just wanted to throw that out there because it's a lot of money over, if the longer period of time that it is, anyhow.
Understood. Something else, and I don't know if this is of interest or not, but the $16 million that DEQ transferred for the Parrot project came out of this funding. So the fact that we're kind of tight right now, I mean, if we hadn't transferred that, we would have easily been able to transfer the $5 million, but we're pretty tight right now because we already did do a significant transfer out. So we will do the best we can, cost efficiency, taking your suggestions, working with NRDP on what we can do, but we need to make sure that we can fulfill our obligations, and that's where we're at this moment.
Elizabeth?
Yes, go ahead, sister.
I have one more. When you look at the orange area where you have got salaries, employee benefits, and other services, how many employees are included in this particular area? And what is again, the other services included in this particular area?
So for personal services, this is a note over on the side, says that this is 0.75 average full-time employee with salaries and benefits. And remember, we're looking at, inflation or escalation on top of that, so that's why those numbers get so big. Unfortunately, we can't pay our scientists that
But isn't
much.
this December 22?
It is, but I mean, just projecting out. And then I'm sorry, the other part of your question was,
Their service.
Other services.
other services. Those other services are basically they're contracts. When we have other services, that category consists those are contracts.
Could we get some kind of an idea of what all that is and what it includes?
Sure.
Thank you.
Sure.
Right, any other questions on financials? Thank you. You're up with Parrot.
Oh. It's the total is 1.6.
Okay. So again, we apologize, Jim's not here to talk about the Parrot monitoring plan. He's not even online, so I know he's sick, so. Next time we'll have him and he'll give us the full update. Really, I guess the short of it is that we started doing the Parrot monitoring plan to establish a baseline of what the groundwater conditions were like in the middle alluvial unit before we started the Parrot project. I think you guys recall that we drilled 26 new wells in order to do that along 5 transects downstream of the plume from the Parrot, or more downstream, one was upstream. And those wells have been monitored quarterly for a whole suite of metals. And we've been doing that for 5 years. I think total we've spent about $1.6 million on that effort. Last year we spent about $360,000. We are looking for ways to cut back on frequency. So right now quarterly we're looking at backing that off, looking at reducing the number of wells and also reducing the number of analytes. So we're looking at that internally, and then Jim has talked with Atlantic Richfield BP because they are also doing monitoring of some of those same wells. So we're looking at how we can not duplicate efforts, and he'll give us a full update on that next time. And right now that's the short of it. So Doug wants to add something.
Yeah, this is Doug Martin. The only thing I would add is that the reason we have to do monitoring to monitor restoration, that is a requirement under the NRD regs. But associated with the Parrot project, there's the paragraph 26 in the consent decree that makes the state potentially liable for any impacts that our project may have on downstream remedies. And so we are assessing that liability as we move forward. And look at what monitoring do we really need to do. But initially, that is why we had to establish this, is to protect the state's liability after implementing the Parrot project associated with the provisions in the consent decree. So that's the main reason we're doing so much monitoring.
That's really it. So if you have any questions, I can tap dance or we can stay until next meeting. If there are none, then we can pass it on to Meranda to go over the BAO and the Parrot financial sheets.
Seeing none, let's do that.
Is my screen sharing?
Just a second, Miranda, it's sharing on the Teams, but not on the, at the conference.
It's here, but I can't go.
Is the Teams window pulled up on the screen up there? That would probably be why it's not.
All right, Miranda, you're on the board now.
Sorry, I couldn't hear you there, Doug. What was that?
You're up, you can go ahead.
Okay.
It's disingenuous to present it exactly what I asked about our interest.
So we did put in your packet a kind of information sheet on some of information on how like Sabres works and how we put together these spreadsheets for you guys. And I do want to thank the council that came about because of questions and suggestions we got from you guys last year. So that's in your packet. I'm not going to go through these slides in detail. I put them on there just in case you have questions on these at the end. But all this information is in the packet. I am going to go through the financials. I'm going to be rounding the numbers up so we don't have to look at all the little tiny detailed numbers, but you have all that in your packet as well. So starting with Butte Area 1, the Silverbow Creek Corridor has no funding at this time. The mine waste area, and let me know if I'm going too fast. I do have these boxes that pop up, so if you're not seeing them, please let me know. For fiscal year 23, which ended in June of 2023, the expenses for the mine waste area was 149,000. General expenses, revenues, and liabilities of just under 82,000. Interest earned of essentially 81,000. Leaving mine waste area with a remaining balance of 1.95 million. Stream restoration had expenses of just 2,000. General expenses, revenues, and liabilities of 71,000. Interest earned of 70,000, and a remaining balance of 1.7 million. The municipal water system improvements spent no money in fiscal year 23. General expenses, revenues, and liabilities of 32,000, interest earned of 31,000, leaving a balance of 755,000. Recreation had no expenses, in fiscal year 23. General expenses, revenues, and liabilities of 47,000. Interest earned of just under 47,000, and a balance of 1.13 million. So small projects spent just under 24,000. General expenses, revenues, and liabilities of 8,000. Interest earned was 8,000 and has a balance of 197,000. That leaves the Butte Area 1 fund with a cash and invested cash balance of 1.74 million. And then just because we are reporting on this later than we normally do in the year, I did pull just our total expenses for and revenues for the fund so far this year. So that's from July 1 to, I think I pulled this at the end of last week. So the revenues were 126,000 and expenses of 212,000. So moving on to Parrot, we're only going to be looking at fiscal year 23. Phase 1 had expenses of 367,000. Phase 2 has essentially 3.33 million. The Butte-Silver boat shops had a very small expense of just under 5,000. Parrot Den, which is just I think just some staff time, was $167, with total Parrot direct expenses of 3.7 million. Then you have general expenses of 167,000, interest earned of just under 300,000. You have this change in liabilities of 72,000, leaving the cash and invested cash balance at essentially 3.57 million. And just to show you what's been spent on Parrot, for lifetime is 30.6 million, and interest earned has been 846,000. And then this year, from 7/1 to date, there's been revenues of 128,000 and expenses of 1.7 million. And that's all I have for you.
All right. Do we have any questions from the council on any of that information?
I got a question.
Go ahead, John.
On the BAO fund, particularly municipal water system and recreation, no projects were completed, but there still is a deduction for general expenses. Could you explain why?
Yeah, so under the Butte Area 1 fund, we have an expense category that is Butte General, which is for things like staff time that's not spent specifically on a single one of these projects, or sites, I should say. And that gets split between all of them, as you can see in that row.
So for example, under mine waste area, I'm assuming the 148 is for, under expenses, is for projects that got done. And under general expenses is staff time to get those projects done?
Somewhat. So if you see at the top of the list, there's that number is 10293. That's what we call our org. That's how we spend the money in our accounting system. So that's in the expense line. That's anything that directly hit that org. And I do believe we can charge staff time. I haven't split that out on here directly to that. But it would be anything for example, staff time spent prepping for and attending these meetings would go to our Butte General and is part of what gets split into those general expenses. Does that make sense?
And where is it in the Parrot Tailings Fund where the costs for the monitoring are broken out?
Let me go back to Parrot. So for monitoring, that's all under that phase 1. So that essentially all of that 367,000 was for that monitoring this in fiscal year 23.
The top line, the top one.
Doug, is it your expectation you're gonna continue to spend $370,000 a year to monitor the project?
This is Doug, Martin. John, no. I mean, that's what, Pat and I talked about. There's some on the PMP monitoring. It's our expectation and our goal is to reduce that monitoring, in 2024 to a more reasonable amount or coordinate it with Atlantic Richfield. So those costs go down significantly.
So question on the municipal water one, there's roughly 750,000 left in that. What is that? Waiting on something? Why haven't we closed that out or done something with that?
So this is Pat. If you recall, that 10 million was dedicated towards the construction of the Basin Creek Water Treatment Plant. There was some pre-treatment elements, basically carbon filtration prior to going through the plant to eliminate biologicals. And they were waiting to see if they needed to build that in. They haven't, but there was about, oh gosh, I think originally we had like 600,000 left that they didn't spend, and it was waiting there to see if they had to spend it. The contract has expired. Those funds have earned interest and it's at 755, and it hasn't been earmarked for anything, but it still is in that category, if that
Okay.
makes sense.
So it's just sitting there basically and the
Yep.
contract's expired and they couldn't use it for carbon even if they wanted to, right, at this point?
We would have to go out for a new contract. We'd have to update the plan.
Okay.
Pat, isn't it if in fact the funds from the Butte account under the CD come to fruition and are repaid, which we all expect, to the BAO in these categories. Some goes to the BAO and then aren't there funds that go back to the groundwater account as well?
Yes, and if you recall, John, we don't have that diagram in our packet. But, oh, Elizabeth,
Well,
yeah, I believe, Miranda, can you pull up that reimbursement diagram?
well, we don't,
Okay.
no,
Okay.
I don't wanna see that diagram,
Ever again.
but wouldn't it be logical that if the funds return to the groundwater account relative to the loan to the Parrot, so it could get done with cash in the bank, and now we have money back, hopefully that'll come back, that if Butte-Silver Bowl, comes back to us and has a project that contributes to, the protection of our groundwater and our, drinking water resources, that they have that opportunity?
Yes, and we do need to sit down and visit with them. Both the groundwater restoration plan contract and the Butte Area 1 Basin Creek contract have expired. So we do need to sit down with Mark Neary and Jim Keenan.
Well, they're here
and get
today,
those
so
alternatives
we should
on the
we
ground.
should start those conversations, because if we get those funds back, and this is why I said it in an earlier email, we have to start anticipating that these resources are gonna be available. We have to draw up and design good projects so this money is put to good use. And that's why I wouldn't recommend we be closing out this municipal system account, Madam Chair, because, combined with the money we hope to be returned to the groundwater account, there's some resources there. We can continue to protect Butte's drinking water, which was the original goal of the BNRC and making that $10 million contribution.
Correct.
And I'll jump in. So my concern here is if you look at this, That fund, instead of sitting there and making any interest last year, lost interest or lost money just because it got, got billed against with all of the rest of the percentages up there. So I guess my recommendation would be, if there's something that we need to spend it and get something for it before there's nothing left in that fund anymore. And I don't want to wait. I don't know how long it's going to take to do this, but that's going down every year while you're doing that.
Well, I don't wanna be contrary, but I would guess that if we close out municipal, that 31,569 is going to be spread across
Absolutely.
the other ones,
Yep, you're right.
because their costs aren't gonna go down.
But if we spent it and got something that we really need, that we don't have to spend taxpayer money on it, then to me, that's a win.
Madam Chair.
Go ahead.
JP Gallagher, Chief Executive. Part of this is in the Butte Area One Restoration Funds. It makes sense to me that, there's money here that is allocated for restoration in the Butte area. Correct. Without these, and we're going into projects moving forward that we know, in the corridor project and within the consent decree, that we're going to be going to a 3-year high water mark and not sure that we're going to be able to remove all the waste during that time. Doesn't it make sense? And isn't the goal of remediation and restoration is to work in coordination and do that? Would be advantageous to say that, when that project commences and they get into that waste and that 3-year high water mark within the corridor project, wouldn't it be advantageous to use restoration? And wouldn't it be appropriate to use restoration dollars to continue for that removal? As we talked about, even as we were talking in the Blacktail, to go down to where the waste is. And so that, wouldn't it be appropriate to use some of this restoration dollars that are left there for that type of work?
I totally agree and think that it's the best use of our dollars to clean up the corridor to the best extent we possibly can. And we've always talked about restoration and remediation together. And it worries me to see money sitting here and the balances to going down and we're not doing anything with it. So that's my 2 cents. Anybody else on the council have thoughts? Go ahead.
This is Doug Martin. JP, as we've talked, we agree with that, and that's part of the task that Pat and Jim and others are working on to try to do that integration. And, if there is a project that does come up, that, the balance of the VAO fund isn't enough, yes, we can amend the plan. We can, to draw on these other funds so that they are spent on the things that everybody thinks that are most appropriate. So, at this point in time, it just, there is a timing issue with, where we are on the cleanup of BAO. I mean, Northside Tailing digging east, we don't have a design yet to integrate. And there is that timing and that negotiation, balance that we have to look at, and that's where we'll make recommendations to you folks in that, we don't want to come forward too soon to AR, to try to integrate, because then all of a sudden, we're in the situation where, we don't want to be spending restoration dollars on remedy. So we do, there is that timing issue, and actually, Pat, you had a good phrase for it earlier today. I forget what you said.
I remember what I had for lunch.
You forgot. But, point taken, and just to let you know, we are looking at that, and, if we do need to move money, we can move money. That's not a big task. I mean, we did it at the end of the 2020. We moved some funds around, so.
Okay.
Yeah, and I don't know what, this is Pat Cunneen with BNRC, not BNRC, NRDP, but we did, Meranda, do you recall, is there a
water restoration plan balance? Or did that one get spent out?
Out of the upper part, there is no,
Okay,
there's no funding there.
okay. The, John, Elizabeth, point taken. I'll work with Butte-Silver Public Works to identify some good alternatives for that money, and we'll sit down and work up some alternatives and bring those to you, and you guys can have some input on that.
Go ahead, John.
So, all right, you guys have a lot of numbers, right? So, all right, so last year, this goes for John and Elizabeth's points, right? Last year, if you just whack the interest number out, we spent 20% more money on the general expenses, liabilities, revenues than we actually spent on project expenses. So we're spending more money just sustaining the program than we're actually spending on doing work. So, so I was thinking both John's, so we take John's point for a sec. You know, this plan we put together way back when with our pennies, and it was a great one, and it came out. So to John's point, if we're gonna wait, or if we want to put the money towards what in things like JV and was asking for is like long-term, okay, well then save the money. And then what I mean by that is we make a vote to shut the program down, put the money into a single account MTBOI, let it gain interest, and we come back when there's a plan. Quit spending money for no point. So that'd be John, save the money and get a big change in the end. But to Elizabeth's point, if you want to try to spend the money now, if you don't want to just bitter that money away, then you definitely need to start spending it now. So, I mean, there may be something fine. We'll find a couple piecemeal projects that we can start spending money against, but we had two big swings, right? We got the Parrot, we got the wastewater treatment plant, and we're sitting on 5.7. And we're spending more now, just paying to keep the program running than we're actually doing anything with it an entire year. So I think there's a question there about just the basic idea of the entire program. Could we find value in saving money long term, just shut it down for a couple of years and coming back? Could we just get something big now and kill it? Because right now we're just wasting. We've got proof in the pudding right here that we spent all years. We're not gonna be.
We're also sitting on a couple $100,000 in small projects too. That's been dormant for
Great.
quite a while. So there's
Close to 10 years. Yes.
over $1 million sitting.
So this is Doug Martin again. So most of the expenses that we have expended over the last couple of years, the Parrot expenses have been coming out of the Parrot fund, but the staff and administrative time that's been coming out of the BAO fund is associated with the BAO consent decree negotiations and the staff time to follow the consent decree implementation. And that's where a lot of our time has been spent. And that's all spelled out in the restoration plan, that's where the staff can spend their time, or the funding comes from for that. If we were to shut that down, the natural resource damage program would have no funding to work on and integrate with the remedy and restoration that is going on associated with the Butte consent.
So that goes sort of counter to like, the first question I asked at the first meeting. I said, okay, fine, this is making X, because we sat down, we were sat with 28 million. They sat us, we're founded with 28 million. We sat us with 32 million. And I said, okay, let's just exist off interest earned. And the first answer back was, you can't do that. You have to spend all this money you don't. So now I'm hearing that, oh, wait, we have to keep the program going to keep things going. So I'm getting curious in the dichotomy of those two answers. Literally our founding question was, you have to spend this money if you don't.
So I agree with that, John. The goal of natural resource damage funds are to spend the money. They're not, at least in Montana, we're not setting up a trust fund. Other people have set up trust funds. We are not doing that. What I am saying is that the staff's time to implement or to follow what's going on with the consent decree those funds to keep the staff working on that are coming out of the BAO fund.
Right.
If you were to shut that down, say you have no expenses, then staff, NRDP staff would no longer be able to work on the deep consent decree implementation.
Cool, so one more follow-up there. Nikia stood there a couple months ago and said, they got 100 years to pollute it, we get 100 years to clean it up. There's not enough money to help you guys go for 100 years. I mean, Nikia said right here in public meeting, he gets 100 years, EPA gets 100 years to clean this place up. We can't.
No.
What do we do? So what's a good answer there? I'm not saying, I'm just trying to like understand where we're at right now, not have a repeat of 23, because people in the community are asking, what are you guys doing?
Right.
How long, so estimate, 10 years, 15 years, how long do we have to think that this money may need to sustain monitoring the CD by staff? That might help answer some.
I'll get back to you on that, John. I don't know. It all depends on how fast the ARCO and EPA move the remedy. We have some, Pat and Jim have some very good ideas of how to spend some of the funds. But those are based on, what is Remedy doing? When is Remedy gonna move? It's just, for instance, the recreation fund. We can't spend any of those dollars until the Remedy's done.
Right. So a re-meet on the plan might be, we could get a budget line item to sustain this for 10 or 15 years. And change up our budget line items from rec and then whatnot to actually put in the budget line items. So this is how much we get per year to sustain CD or to sustain the administrative costs. Rather than just have the administrative costs show up and get carved out with the percentage of the we're going to balance it through finance. So just food for thought about just inherent structure of our plan. We might want to relook at that. If we're going to sustain something for an unknown amount of time, we might need to look at that. Because I think right now, I think there's 2 or 3 people right now who could show up and say, they're taking all this money right now, and do a project that is qualified to do. Maybe not the rec, but other than that, we could spend the same tomorrow.
And if we could, this is Doug speaking, if we could, John, that would be fine.
But then happens before you guys monitor CP. Oh, money's gone.
Well, we would. We don't exist without this fund. So, the Natural Resource Damage Program wouldn't be funded through the BAO plan to look at the implementation of the CD. If we came up with a project that spent $5.7 million.
Thanks.
All right.
Well, can I follow up on 2 things that Doug said now? First of all, I keep hearing that we're not gonna spend any money until the remedy is done. That portends to me that we're not gonna integrate any investments on the restoration side with the remedy. We're gonna go at this, instead of an integrated approach, we're gonna do it linearly. We're gonna wait for the remedy to be completed, and then we're gonna start talking about restoration projects in the same corridor. It just doesn't make sense to me. Instead of thinking ahead of ourselves, and how can we use these restoration funds in concert with remedial actions, so we get the best bang for our buck.
And so, John, if I said that, then I misspoke, and I apologize for that. I was not indicating that we had to wait for remedy yet. We need to wait till we know what remedy is doing. We don't know the removal at east side or at north side tailings, or digging Z's. We don't know those yet. So we can't integrate with that. Once we do know that, then we can integrate. I do agree with you that we have to do it. We have to integrate in the process. We are not necessarily waiting for them to get done to integrate. That's where Pat and Jim are participating in these design meetings, so that when there is a chance for us to integrate, we can integrate with that. So no, we are not waiting to the end. We are working on that now. I guess and maybe if I may have misspoke on that.
I think what you said is that for the recreation pot, we need to wait until the remedy's done. And I think that's written in the plan, the way that's what we said we would do with that. But if we, I guess this is a question for you guys, if we did decide to move money around and have a pot to be able to do something in conjunction with remedy, could we move that recreation money into a different pot and then be able to do something with it?
This is Pat. So in the Butte Area 1 restoration plan, we can move up to 10% of the category total into another category without revising the plan.
Okay.
So if we wanted to move more than 10%, say you wanted to move $500,000 out of recreation into another category to do a project, that would require a restoration plan revision. And certainly if you guys identify a need for that, we can bring alternatives to you, let you guys look at those. And if we want to move those monies around, I have no problem going through the process of changing the plan again. I think we've amended the plan 3 times now. Well,
3 or 4, yeah.
3 or 4. So
Yeah.
one more revision is, we just go through that process. It does, we go out for public comment, but we can certainly go that route. And, I think when we're talking about some of the alternatives for these other monies, one of the projects that we have talked about in the past is we did this during construction where we took, in order to dewater the site, we pumped that water to Montana Resources, and we pumped several billion gallons of contaminated water over to MR, and it went into their process. And that had a profound impact on the contaminated alluvial groundwater. So if we were looking at projects where this money could be spent that would benefit the resource, I would say that was one that we should include, because I think when you rank that against the criteria that are in Superfund law and the policy criteria that you guys developed, I think that project would rank very high. And John, you talked too about removing additional contamination below the 3-year high groundwater mark. And then the other one would be that we've talked about in the past is eliminating the reuse of backfill and bringing in clean backfill as an alternative. So those are all things that we could identify where these funds could go. And John, I agree with you. I remember Rob Collins saying that get the money spent. This council was projected to sunset in 2016 because our goal was to spend the money by then. So
We missed that by a few years.
we did.
All right,
Yeah.
well, let's take this stuff and think about it and bring some alternatives together, but I know Butte-Silver wants to get up here and probably go home and go to bed.
Okay.
Thanks. Aaron. This is JP Gallagher, Chief Executive of Butte-Silver Bowling. So we're coming forward today. We had a good meeting the other day with Flugge and Pat, talked about some things, and at the end of the meeting, we agreed to disagree on the ending of the shop relocation. When we started the project, I was not the chief executive at the time, but what was agreed to was to try to relocate the shops and have like for like. But the price of what relocating the shops were, there were some things that were cut out of the project because the projected costs were going to go too high. And one of those things that was cut out of there were the fuel tanks, because with relocation of the fuel tanks, they felt that would exceed the cost of the $14,545,000 in $225, I guess, in there. But throughout the project, Butte-Silver Bowl worked hand in hand with the project, with the contractors, and we came in under budget. And so we had implemented a card program with the fuel program in Butte-Silver Bowl that although it works, everyone saw what happened with fuel prices over the last few years and what happened with that. And not being able to buy fuel in bulk has substantially increased the costs of doing business in Butte-Silver Bowl and to the taxpayers. And that's ultimately, and that was kind of the deal, is it's not going to have an impact to the taxpayers. Well, it's having an impact to the taxpayers. So we went, we met with Harley and Doug last spring and talked about this. And as we left the meeting, Harley, in theory, agreed that the remaining money that was left over from the savings that Butte-Silver Bowl helped to do in the projects would, he would ask to have that money given back so that we could go towards the purchase of new tanks. Butte-Silver Bowl has purchased new tanks at the sum of over $500,000 currently. All we're asking for is the savings that we did by going through the project, just to have that $300,000 that was saved over time that Butte-Silver Bowl did by coming in under budget, relocating the shops up to their current location. It wasn't, we're not asking for anything more. I've changed that. One of the things that was said after it was kind of agreed to was that, well, it's already closed out, so we'd have to go back and reopen and ask for allocation. I'm saying, okay, what do we have to do that? Now, as Doug said to me the other day, he said, we don't see this as restoration. I agree in some respect, but either were the shops when you look at it that way. All of it was to get like for like, and that's all we're asking for is the remaining money that was saved on the project to go back to that. So if they're not able to do it here, we talked about the dollars that are left in here. Is there an opportunity to allocate some of the dollars within the projects that we have? The BNRC has the availability to do that. And as I said, when we finished our meeting the other day, this is not to cause controversy between NRDP and Butte-Silver Bowl, but I disagree. I believe that we should be entitled to the leftover money that project cost Butte-Silver Bowl that was projected out that we came in under budget. We worked with them on their schedule. We moved out of the shops early to allow the contractor to get going because of the costs that were being built up with those guys not being able to get going on the work. We've saved them money. I think that Butte-Silver Bowl should be entitled to that. Just the $300,000. No more, no less. That's all we were asking for. So that's kind of our proposal to you today. And I can, I know Doug has a different feeling towards that and he can speak to you as well. But I think, as we left, I said, we can agree to disagree, but I think we're entitled to it. So.
Thanks, Jeffy. Do you have questions from the council?
Yeah, anybody for me? Yeah, sorry.
Well, my questions are probably more to Doug. Yeah, I agree with you. I think it's, first of all, the notion of saying no because it's not a restoration project. There wouldn't be a Parrot tailings project if not for the county's participation and cooperation in moving its shops. So this business of it's not being a restoration project is just seemingly unfair. It needs to be understood that when we started this down this road and we were going to move the county shops, the first engineering estimates, architectural estimates for the like for like was in excess of $15 million, $15.5 million, almost $16 million, like for like. And the NRD appealed to Butte-Silver Bowl, what can we do to bring that cost down to the 14.5 level? And so we went back to the drawing board. We asked our architect and his engineers to help us figure this out. And two major things we came up with. One was if we would eliminate the cost of the underground tanks at the new facility, we could save X numbers of dollars. And the other thing we decided to do was to repurpose 3 of the buildings on site at the county shops and rebuild them over at the new shops. We didn't Butte-Silver Bow did not stick their foot in the ground. They did not say, no, we're not helping. You pay us $16 million or we're not moving. We went through the process to try to reduce this cost. And the expectation at the time was if we were able to save money throughout the construction of the project, that Butte-Silver Bow could come back and ask for funds. Now, I'm sorry to hear that the fleet retail purpose, because at the beginning, when we did do the conversion to go into town pump, I guess they got the bid. We were able to accumulate the total amount of gallons purchased to retain the bulk discount that we were offered. We obviously continue to retain that we don't have to pay taxes on it because we're not a public entity. But now, if that in fact has gone away, that was a significant variable. When we decided to go with that program, you know, the vendors were telling us that they were gonna honor the bulk discount, and that was a big number, 3-4%, and it was more gonna make up than for the retail cost. We have to pay a fee at every transaction, because that's the way these systems work. But now Butte-Silver Bow has decided to go back to having the bulk on site and having all their vehicles go out to that facility. It just seems so reasonable to me. We got $4.5 million that has been saved on the project overall, the Parrot Tailings Fund as was presented tonight. This seems like a small amount, particularly if Butte-Silver Bow, through its efforts to control costs, came in under budget in the first place. So I'm supportive of the request, although I'm wondering what are we, what's our authority to make a decision on this? Are we gonna make a motion and a vote, and where would the money come from on all these budgets that we receive? Would it come out of the Parrot Tailings Fund, which I think would be most appropriate? Or are you asking us to take it out of the Butte Area 1 funds, the money that we do have, I guess, some advisory capacity over? Where's we were successful, if this is a successful ask, where does the money come from?
You know, we're looking potentially at the municipal water system fund.
In the BSL instead of the Parrot fund?
Well, out of the Parrot, if they're not able to do it, we're just asking if we could do it out of that. So.
Well, that's where the.
Hey, John, sorry, this is Eric with Butte-Silver Bow. We're looking for an alternative funding source of $307,000.
Because ultimately, we're putting it back on the taxpayers, which we said we wouldn't do.
And when the answer from NRD on the 3.7 was this does not fit, we assumed it wasn't fitting the Parrot budget, and we were asking to come before the BNRC to see if it fit one of the buckets of money that you guys do control.
Well, am I correct in understanding that $14,237,482 came out of the Parrot fund to move the county shops?
Mm-hmm.
So why wouldn't the $307,000 leftover come out of that same fund?
So this is Doug Martin, and this is the conversation we had with JP, that the contract or the agreement that we have with Butte-Silver Bow was like for like, or what Butte-Silver Bow had decided to do. Butte-Silver Bow, at its own discretion, but just like you said, John, chose to go to the card reader system.
No, now I said that because Butte-Silver Bow agreed to work with NRD to keep the cost of moving the shops down to its lowest number, we decided to go as one option among many to keep the cost down. This was not something we wanted to do. You're painting it like we decided that independently of the need to save money on the Parrot project. That's not true.
Well, in the agreement so I was not part of those.
Right, you weren't there.
So I'm reading what contract I have in front of me. And that's where we have come, you know, it's the, and we have paid for our obligation on that. And from a restoration standpoint, purchasing tanks does not fit under, for restoration. The moving the county shops fit under restoration, because in order to get to the Parrot tailings, you had to move the overburden or the material on top, and part of that was the shops. So that's where the shops come under the restoration.
I would,
So your position is that Butte-Silver Bow should have instead resisted any efforts to try to save money at the time we were building the new county shops and let that project just come to a standstill. That's what you're saying?
That's not what I'm saying.
Yeah, you are.
What I'm saying is that to meet the obligations of the agreement, Butte-Silver Bow did that, and we have our obligations there too. So, you know, as I said, John, I wasn't in those negotiations. I don't know what you guys did. I don't know what the state did. We can get back to you with more facts on what Butte-Silver Bow has provided here today. JP, I would note though that, you know, in our conversation, one of the things that we have talked about is how can we get, you know, dollars that the NRD program does have to Butte-Silver Bow to compensate for this.
This is JP, and I would agree, you've made, suggestions that, using Silver Lake water that, you know, that NRDP could pay us for, and then we could take that money and use that to pay for tanks. To me, and you're like, you can use that for whatever you want it to be. The thing that I find troublesome is it's kind of like, well, here's a way for your out, rather than we did our obligation. We kept the project under budget. We worked with NRDP to make sure that everything was done on schedule. We even accelerated that schedule. And then we asked for the remainder of what that budget was. And we originally got told, yes, we support it, and then turned around and got told, no, we wouldn't support it, and said that because there's other things that Butte-Silver Bow is asking, even like Greenway Fund, things like that. And I was like, it seems to me like we're getting held hostage on other things to say, well, you can do it this way, not this way. And all I'm asking for is just giving us the money of what we saved in the original project. I don't think that's an unreasonable ask. Again, this isn't to fight with anybody, but I believe Butte-Silver Bow fulfilled their obligation, and we're not asking for anything unreasonable other than the money that was left over that was allocated to that project. So who does that money go to?
So the leftover money from the Parrot goes back to the funds where it came. So it would go back to BAO, it would go back to Butte Groundwater, and go back to the Upper Park Port Fund.
So that's why I'm asking you. So if it goes back to BAO and it's gonna come back, can we do it out of another project? Can we do it out of another way? If we can't work it in the BNRC allocate that? Okay, I guess that's an alternative is what I'm asking.
Okay, Sean, did you have a comment?
Well, I think we're just working around policy right now. I mean, no one's saying no, no one's saying we can't do it. I think what we're getting at right now is, you just said it. There's the $3.5+ million surplus left in that budget. So everybody did great work saving money, getting MR to help. We came in under budget, so there's money left. That money's gonna go back. So it's just the process of the go back. So if we take a look at the 3.5, I think there's two things here that probably I would advocate for as a council. One, the balance, yeah, the 307, yeah. But then I would just go ahead and advocate that the money coming back to the BAO out of this 3.5 is gonna be greater than 500, which is generally what they're saying they just spent on the tanks. And I suggest we just go ahead and recompensate on the whole value. That was 500. We just call it good.
Out of the Parrot fund.
Out of the remainder that comes back out of the parent budget, so you go to fiscal year end cash of 3.5 on 23, that's the only number I've got, of course. But it's gonna get wrapped up, the money's gonna get sent back, let's just allocate or earmark the money when it comes back this way through whichever funding source we can to go at least the 307, but why not just do the whole 5? If it's like for like, let's just do it.
So the money coming, this is Doug, the money coming back from the Parrot has already been allocated to different categories. You did that in 2020.
Right, we just have to amend the plan. Again, we're just back to policy now. It's just amend the plan to make a choice. But that, I don't know, that's my first take on it.
So.
Okay.
Okay.
The base concept of that contract was like, kind, form and function. I mean, regardless of who gave up what to come under budget, the premise of that contract is we would receive like, kind, form and function, and we did not. We opted to an alternative that tried to help save money, that in the long run ended up costing our taxpayers, which was not supposed to be the case, or was, we were hoping would not be the case. It ended up being so, but we are still not directly to like, kind, form and function of what we had at the previous county shops, which was a fuel station with tanks. And I don't understand how we can even banter back and forth that this is not a cost associated with the shops because of the like, kind, form and function. That was the genesis and basis of that contract. That we would come out of that project whole, if you will. And we didn't.
I think one thing you said it once is about 5-6 years ago, a gentleman stood up and said, why are you guys spending taxpayers' money? And you stood right up and said, this isn't taxpayers' money. And I think that's a really curious point here, is that if there has been a burden on unintentionally, again, just by the process of contracts, just by the process of structure of agreement, it's just a policy and bureaucracy change that we can solve